Chapter 10:15. There's a man in the family that I can't see. The man stared at her. Feng Ling's face was cold. No. Is there anything in the house that I can't see? No. Then why can't I go in and sleep? You could sleep anywhere, but you just had to sleep in my house. I've been standing outside all night. Do you want me to go back to the car and sleep? That's your business. I don't care. Li Nanheng looked at her for a while and coughed lightly. All right, I'll go back to the car. She saw that the man was indeed thinner than 2 years ago. It was not that his figure was thin. His figure had always been perfect, but his entire body felt thin. Obviously, he had not been living well in the past 2 years, and he really did not rest well in the past few days. Feng Ling looked at his back, and did not feel her heart soften. She just looked at the mini cigarette butts, the man's slightly messy hair, and his slightly haggard face. Indeed, there was nothing in her house that could not be seen by others. It was well behaved and not messy. There was nothing that could not be seen, even if they were no longer in a relationship, even if she had let go of what happened in the past. He was still her boss. Did you really stand here the entire night without sleeping? She asked softly. The man who had already walked to the elevator door had his back facing her. He also glanced at the cigarette butts over there, then turned back to look at her from the corner of his eye. What do you think? You're already so sleepy. What's the point of being so cocky? Feng Ling looked at his back expressionlessly, pushed the door open, and took a step out. Go in and sleep. I'll be home before 6:30 p.m. Leave before I get home. Don't let me see you when I come back. Li Nanheng looked back at her and she said, I'll take the key. Just close the door when you leave. Also, you're only allowed to sleep on the sofa. Don't touch anything else. Don't dirty my house. This time, Li Nanheng simply turned around and looked down at the woman, who was almost in front of him. I'm a germaphobe. How dirty do you think I will be? Feng Ling did not speak but glanced at him again. Aren't you sleepy and need to sleep? If you don't go in, I'll lock the door. Li Nanheng looked at her sportswear and the bag in her hand. You don't pretend to be a man anymore. Why are you still so rude? Feng Ling couldn't be bothered with him. She pressed the elevator button and did not speak further. Seeing that she was really in a hurry to go out, and obviously didn't want to talk, Li Nanheng didn't rush to say more. He glanced at her impatient and indifferent expression, turned and walked in. When he entered the door, he suddenly asked, Is there breakfast at home? No. Feng Ling stood in front of the elevator and responded coldly. Then why didn't you eat just now? Yes, I have. You didn't leave any? I don't raise a cat or a dog at home. I eat as much as I can. What's there to keep? Looking at the slowly rising number in the elevator, she said, There's bread in the fridge. If you want to eat it, bake it yourself. Well, I'm going to sleep first. I'll eat when I wake up. The man closed the door after he finished speaking. Feng Ling, looking at the elevator in front of him in silence, he felt upset no matter how he thought about it. She felt that she shouldn't have let him in. Although it was true that last night, he was very well behaved and didn't barge in as domineeringly as before. He was also very polite and stayed outside for the whole night. He didn't beg for forgiveness in front of her, nor did he pester her to explain, nor did he force himself on her. But now he was so shameless. It wasn't until the door was closed from the inside that Feng Ling realized what she was thinking. Why did she let him in? If he was too domineering, she would definitely reject him. But he seemed to be doing the opposite. The elevator door opened. There was no time to think too much. She walked into the elevator, looked back at the closed door, frowned slightly, and then closed the door. When she left the apartment building, she lost interest in running in the morning. She went to the parking lot and sat in the car, feeling the ultra-low temperature outside the car for a whole night. She thought of the man who said that he had been sleeping in the car for the past few days. What did he want to do? If he knew her well enough, no, it should be said that he definitely knew her well enough. He should be very clear that no matter what, she and he could not go back to the way they were 2 years ago. It was also impossible for her to have any ambiguous feelings with a man who was already married, or to have feelings that were beyond reason. He should know that there was no need for him to stay here, because there would be no result. 6 o'clock in the evening. It's time to get off work. Why haven't you left today? The head coach had just finished the last class of the day. When he entered the office, he saw Feng Ling sitting in front of the computer with a cup in her arms. Feng Ling looked up at him. Nothing. Sit in the office for a while. The weather is so cold. Why are you sitting here? It's so warm at home. The head coach smiled. Did you drive here? Do you need me to send you back? Yes, I can go back by myself. Feng Ling put down the cup and looked at the time. I'll leave at 6:30. The head coach looked at her again. Are you feeling unwell? No. Usually, you go home on time after getting off work. Why don't you want to go back today? Feng Ling didn't answer but smiled slightly and still didn't speak. She was not sure whether Li Nanheng had left or not, nor did she know if he had woken up. She felt that if she went back a little later, she might be able to miss him, but she was not sure. She would delay as long as she could. She already regretted letting him in. If it weren't for the fact that the weather was too cold, she would have strolled outside all night. It was 6:40 p.m. The lights inside and outside the martial arts club had been turned off, leaving only the office open. The area around the Polytechnic University was a school district with a very strict management system. Some of the martial arts dojos and the like must strictly follow the prescribed time to rest. If they continued to keep the lights on, they might be suspected of increasing the class time and might be investigated. Seeing that she couldn't delay any longer, Feng Ling got up to pack up and drove home. When she drove to the apartment, she looked up and found that the lights in the room were dim. Did this mean that Li Nanheng had already left? After staring up for a while, Feng Ling hesitated and got out of the car to go home. When she arrived at the door, she opened the door with the key and walked in. Looking at the dark room, she raised her hand and touched the wall. With a paw sound, the lights in the small living room suddenly turned on. Chapter 10:16. The moment the light returned, a man was lying on the small sofa that had always been empty. The moment the light came on, it was clearly too bright. The man frowned and casually grabbed a white pillow on the white carpet. He pressed it against his face and continued to sleep. The moment the light came on, it was clearly too bright. The man furrowed his brows and casually grabbed a white pillow on the white carpet. He pressed it against his face and continued to sleep. Feng Ling saw that he had not left and immediately stared coldly at the man on the sofa. She did not speak but raised her hand and placed it against the wall. She abruptly turned off the light. 5 seconds later, she turned it back on, turned it off, and turned it on again. After flashing for more than 10 times, the man finally could not take it anymore. He grabbed the useless pillow on his face and turned to look at her. What are you doing? Aren't you afraid that the light will be broken? Didn't I tell you that I would be back after 6:30 p.m.? I told you to leave before I came back. Isn't it enough for you to sleep here for a whole day? This time, Feng Ling turned on the light again and moved her hand away from the wall. Her expression was clearly not kind. Li Nanheng sat up on the sofa and raised his hand to push aside his slightly messy hair. He opened a pair of eyes that appeared to be very sleepy to say, I slept for a while when I came in this morning. Someone is renovating next door, so I didn't sleep well. In the afternoon, I studied your toaster for a long time and didn't eat anything. I slept with an empty stomach until now. I'm guessing that I'm physically weak, so I slept for a long time and didn't wake up. Feng Ling. What a wonderful reason. If she didn't know how domineering and shameless Li Nanheng was, she would have really believed him. Seeing her standing in front of the door with a cold expression, Li Nanheng leaned against the sofa, as if he hadn't slept well. The man who was nearly 1.9 meters tall sat on such a small sofa. He felt that he could stretch his legs out of the edge of the carpet. He leaned his head against the back of the sofa lazily and said hoarsely, Someone really renovated it. Feng Ling had just said that she had lived here for so long, and had never heard of anyone renovating. However, before she could speak, she suddenly heard the loud sound of an electric drill hitting the wall next door. She swallowed the words that were about to come out of her mouth. After restraining herself for a few seconds, she said, No matter what, you've rested here. It's time to go. Li Nanheng stood up. Feng Ling saw that his black sportswear jacket was thrown to the side, and that the iron gray t-shirt on his body was slightly wrinkled due to sleeping. However, the wrinkles were inexplicably sexy, and the man's strong collarbone was almost exposed. Feng Ling calmly shifted her gaze away. I'm going to wash my face. Li Nanheng did not say much, and turned to enter the bathroom. At first Feng Ling did not speak. However, when the man was about to enter her bedroom, her gaze suddenly changed. She abruptly raised her eyes to look over. Seeing that the man had already entered, she hurriedly followed him. By the time she reached the bedroom door, the man had already stepped into the bathroom. He was about to turn on the faucet when he saw something from the corner of his eye, and turned to look. Feng Ling was about to shout, "Don't look." However, when the words were about to come out of her mouth, she felt that these two words were very strange. She couldn't help but stiffen. As expected, she saw the man's back stiffen for an instant. She was no longer dressed as a man. Although she wore sportswear every day, at least her underwear was normal. Every day, her underwear that she washed would be hung on a small drying rack above the bathroom. Right now there were two sets of underwear on it, one white and the other flesh-colored. There was also a set of black sports-style underwear that she was wearing. Li Nanheng was only stunned for a moment. It seemed that he had long been used to having no taboos wherever Feng Ling was. After all, she had never had these things in her room before. He turned to look at Feng Ling, who was looking a little awkward. Feng Ling was only embarrassed for a moment. She glanced at the faucet by his hand. After washing your face, hurry up and leave. Li Nanheng did not say anything. He washed his hands in the slightly cold water for a while before lowering his head to wash his face. Feng Ling could not be bothered to look at him. She turned to leave. The man washed his face very quickly. He casually washed his face a few times. It was likely that he knew that she did not have much patience with him right now. He did not use her towel, and directly walked out with his face wet. He casually wiped his face with his hands, and walked to the coffee table to pull out a few pieces of tissue paper to wipe his face. As the man wiped the water that was about to drip down his chin, he said, "There's a problem with your toaster. I haven't eaten anything all day. Right now, even if I want to leave, I don't have the strength." Each reason was more lame than the other. Feng Ling had long expected that he would not leave so easily. However, she also lost her patience. She walked to the sofa, picked up his coat, and threw it on him. "Even if you have to crawl, you have to get out." Li Nanheng received the coat, and casually placed it in the crook of his arm. He then looked at her. "So heartless." Feng Ling sneered. "Heartless is also related to love. Don't think too highly of yourself. There's nothing to talk about between us. It's just that there's no need to keep a distance between us. Mr. Li, on account of the fact that you were my boss, and that you took good care of me, I allowed you to come in and sleep for a day. However, I'm sorry, you have already exceeded my tolerance." Li Nanheng smiled. He suddenly threw the coat in his hand back onto the sofa. The smile in his eyes was gone. He looked at her, and his voice was cold and angry. "Your tolerance? What did you think the 2 years you were missing meant to me? The base chased you out, and you ran away without a word. You didn't even think to look for me? Why would I look for you? Did you abandon your new wife, put aside your honeymoon period, and return to the base to save me?" Feng Ling looked at him coldly. "Even if I, Feng Ling, am a child raised by a wolf and don't understand the ways of the world, at least I know my own limits. New wife, honeymoon period?" Li Nanheng suddenly wanted to curse. However, it seemed that he could only curse himself. Back then, he had rejected Feng Mingzhu, and because the relationship between the two families could not be too stiff, how could he have thought of marrying a child's cenotaph? All along, he had never had any concept of women. Back then, why didn't he think that he would really fall in love with a girl in this life? The man raised his hand and placed it on his forehead. He knocked himself hard twice. "Damn it," Feng Ling said coldly. "I remember that Feng Mingzhu hated me very much. It's probably because she saw the things between you and me. After all, you are her husband now. There are some things that you don't need me to remind you of. Please leave." Li Nanheng gritted his teeth. "I didn't marry Feng Mingzhu." Chapter 10:17. Feng Ling looked at him indifferently. "No matter who you marry, It has nothing to do with me. She bent down and picked up the pillow from the ground. Then, with a look of disgust on her face, she turned around and threw it into the dirty laundry basket, as if it couldn't be kept in her house unless it was washed. Looking at the little woman's obvious movements, every movement expressed her disgust, impatience, and disgust towards him. Li Nanheng suddenly recalled the day when he was not in the base. For the next 700 days and nights, he couldn't sleep at night whenever he thought of it. She drank an entire bottle of brandy alone, and was thrown to the ground in public the next day. All her secrets and truths were revealed. All her face, all her dignity, and everything she insisted on were completely destroyed. Thinking about all of this, all of his unwillingness, seemed to have turned into the fact that he deserved it. The man threw down his coat again. None of your business. Since you insist on looking at the past in this way, fine, I won't force you. Let's go for a meal. Feng Ling looked at him as if he was crazy and refused. I don't want to eat it. Li Nanheng didn't force her. He simply sat back on the sofa. Then I'll order takeout. I'll leave after eating. Before this, Feng Ling didn't believe that Li Nanheng would be so shameless. She looked at the man on the sofa coldly. Do you want to be a rogue to the end? The man crossed his legs calmly and answered. You. Can you beat me? Can you even push me? All the military and police in the United States are related to 11 base. Do you think you can get me away even if you call the police now? Let's order takeout. The man's tone was lazy and indifferent. He just sat on her sofa and didn't leave. Feng Ling took a deep breath and suddenly turned into the kitchen. She threw the remaining pieces of bread in front of him and placed a bottle of jam heavily in front of him. Eat. We'll leave immediately after eating. Li Nanheng glanced at the two things on the coffee table. He was not picky about food. He reached out to pick them up and looked at them. You let me eat this at noon, but I didn't eat it. Now you want me to eat it at night? Do you want to eat or not? If you don't want to eat, scram. Feng Ling's patience had reached its limit. Looking at this man who was even more shameless than 2 years ago, all her composure and indifference instantly turned into a violent emotion. She really wanted to kick him down from the 15th floor. Li Nanheng did not look at her. He casually picked up the bottle of jam, glanced at it and smiled. Blueberry. Feng Ling didn't have many sentimental feelings, but when she heard this, she suddenly remembered the blueberry cake he took her to eat. It seemed like she used to have a slight preference for blueberry-flavored things, but for some reason it became an obsession. Everything seemed to be fixed on blueberry as the only option. She did not speak but glanced at the time. Can you finish it in 10 minutes? The man smeared the blueberry jam on the bread. In fact, the bread had been in the fridge for a whole day. It was not baked or heated. Even if it was not hard, it was definitely very cold and uncomfortable to eat. The man, on the other hand, took a few bites and ate the 2 pieces of bread with a bit of jam. Then, he continued to smear on the bread. In less than 3 to 4 minutes, he had finished the remaining pieces of bread. After eating, the man slowly closed the lid of the jam and put it aside. He then looked at her. A very sumptuous meal. Not bad. Feng Ling. She was about to ask if there was something wrong with this man's brain when he had already stood up, picked up his coat, and said indifferently, Sorry for disturbing. Then he left. The door opened and closed, and the surroundings returned to silence. Finally, she was alone again. Feng Ling silently looked at the jam on the coffee table and did not move for a long time. Feng Ling was sick. All the students were surprised to learn that Coach Ling, who had never taken a leave since working in the martial arts club, was sick and even took 2 days off. They wondered if something had happened. And the real reason was that after Li Nanheng left that night, Feng Ling always felt that the room was filled with that man's smell. The kitchen, the bathroom, the sofa, the living room. She seemed to be able to feel the traces of that man's existence wherever she went, even though he did not leave anything behind. So on that cold night, she opened all the windows in the room, trying to release the man's unique smell and the faint scent of tobacco. However, because the windows were open for too long, and it was too cold outside, the edge of the bedroom window was frozen and could not be closed tightly, so the wind leaked out at night. Feng Ling's bed was facing that window, and unfortunately, She caught a cold from the cold wind that leaked in that night. The next morning, she could not even get out of bed. The world was spinning around her. She reluctantly took out her mobile phone to call the manager and the boss to ask for a day off. Then, she slept the whole day and did not wake up until the next morning. When she woke up, she did not feel like eating. She boiled some water, wrapped herself in a blanket, and sat on the sofa with a cup of hot water in her hands. She drank it in small sips and barely made it through the second day of her leave. She only asked for one day off, but the next day she was still sick and couldn't make it. The paper basket was full of paper towels to wipe her nose. She coughed one after another. She had never been so sick because of a cold since she was a child. She slept on the sofa for another day. That night, Feng Ling was about to go to the bathroom to take a hot bath to get rid of the illness, when suddenly there was a knock on the door. She was now very concerned about people who would suddenly knock on her door. Hearing the knock, she frowned and subconsciously didn't want to open the door. She just wanted to pretend to be dead in the room. The person outside knocked for a while, but didn't hear any movement inside, so she quieted down. Just when Feng Ling was about to return to the bedroom, the phone on the bed suddenly rang. She walked over while sniffling. It turned out to be a call from Chen Beiqing. She picked up the phone in doubt. "Hello. Why don't you open the door? Aren't you sick and resting at home?" The person who knocked on the door was classmate Chen. Feng Ling paused and turned to walk out. When she opened the door, she saw Chen Beiqing standing outside, holding the phone that was talking to her. The moment he opened the door, he saw Feng Ling's slightly red nose. Chen Beiqing raised his eyebrows. "Are you really sick? I thought you were hiding from me. I want to chat with more like-minded people about, young Master Mo. Have you kissed enough? Talk about life, and find a confidant." Chapter 10:18. You think too highly of yourself. Would I not go to work just to avoid you? I'm someone who never asks for sick leave. Is there a need to do this? That's why I specifically asked the manager for your address and came over to take a look. Chen Beiqing didn't feel hurt by her direct retort. He smiled and raised a bowl of ginger soup he bought from outside. Drink some ginger soup if you have a cold. When I was in China, every time I had a bad cold, the auntie at home would force me to drink this. Although it tastes bad, it really has a good effect on colds. Feng Ling glanced at it and reached out to receive it. All right, thank you. I'll leave the ginger soup. You can go back. Chen Beiqing didn't dare to enter her place, but he still raised his eyebrows. What? Am I going to eat you or what? I can't beat you. A starving camel is still bigger than a horse. Even if I catch a cold, I still can't beat you. What are you afraid of? It's not that I'm afraid. I'm a coach and you're a student. We still have to follow the etiquette, Feng Ling said calmly. Is there anything else? If there's nothing else, I'm closing. Chen Beiqing looked at her again. Have you eaten anything in the past 2 days? I ate it, Feng Ling lied. She looked sick, so he couldn't tell if she had eaten or not. But seeing that she didn't want him to go in at all, Chen Beiqing nodded. Okay. It's the first time you've accepted something from me in more than a year. Even if it's just a bowl of ginger soup I bought from a restaurant, you've already accepted it. I'll work harder, and one day you'll fall in love with me. Feng Ling, you think too much. Have a good rest, I'm leaving. Chen Beiqing smiled at her, waved his hand and walked to the elevator. When he entered the elevator and Feng Ling was about to close the door, she suddenly heard the door next door suddenly open. She didn't want to care about what happened next door, but she seemed to see something from the corner of her eyes. She abruptly paused and turned her eyes abruptly. Li Nanheng, who would never appear here again, was standing at the door next door. He pushed the door open with one hand and held his coat with the other. He seemed to be preparing to go out, but his gaze paused on the bowl of ginger soup in her arms. Did you catch a cold? Feng Ling looked at him in disbelief, and then at the door next door. She recalled that day when he said that the next door was being renovated. There was really the sound of an electric drill drilling the wall. Feng Ling. Therefore, she had never seen what her next-door neighbor looked like. She only knew that she seemed to be a very old auntie. Could it be that in just a few days, the house had changed owners? Or did Li Nanheng rent this house? Otherwise, how could he appear next door? Moreover, it was clear that he had been staying here for the past 2 days. There was only a wall between his bedroom and hers. He had never left. He was the one who hired the renovation that day. Li Nanheng walked over, and Feng Ling abruptly returned to her senses. She looked straight at him. What are you doing here? What do you think I'm doing? I've been looking for someone for 2 years. I can't possibly let you disappear just like that. Li Nanheng raised his hand and took the ginger soup from her hands. Back then, I taught you the anti-investigation methods in the base. In the past 2 years, you've been using them against me. You're so good at using my spear to attack my shield. What else can I do other than guard the place closest to you? Feng Ling didn't know if it was because she had caught a cold, but her reaction was slightly slow. When she recovered from his words, the man had already entered the kitchen with the bowl of ginger soup. She rushed in, only to see that Li Nanheng had turned on the gas stove. This ginger soup isn't hot enough. Heat it up before drinking it. Why did you suddenly catch a cold? I didn't see you come out for 2 days. I thought you were on vacation. If I had known that you were sick, it wouldn't have been that brat's turn to deliver ginger soup to your doorstep. Hearing the uneasiness in the man's tone, Feng Ling suddenly realized that Li Nanheng seemed to have changed. However, she couldn't tell what had changed, nor did he seem to have changed. However, although he was domineering, he suddenly had a sense of propriety. He wouldn't force her to do anything when she didn't have any feelings for him, or even when he was already married. Or rather, he had something he was afraid of. Therefore, when it came to matters regarding her, he was no longer so straightforward. Instead, he treated her carefully, afraid that if he really ignited her fire, she would disappear completely. She couldn't describe what kind of feeling this was. In any case, looking at the man who was heating up the ginger soup for her, Feng Ling raised her hand to touch her forehead. She didn't want to speak. He had already moved next door. If she still said that she wanted to chase him away, it would be a joke. At most, they were only a few meters apart. He was still next door. Crazy. She really wanted to curse. However, right now, regardless of whether it was her strength or energy, she didn't have the strength to fight with this man. She simply didn't speak and sat on the sofa. She wrapped herself in the blanket and coughed a few times. A few minutes later, the man brought out the heated ginger soup and placed it on the coffee table in front of her. Drink it. Feng Ling coughed again and raised her eyes to look at him. The house next door, did you rent it or buy it? What's the difference? That's right. If he wanted to continue living here, whether it was renting or buying, he had his ways. After all, he was the young master of the Li family. Power and money were nothing to him. He was nothing like the ants in the world she had seen in the past 2 years. She raised the bowl to her mouth and the man reminded, "Be careful, it's hot." She paused and lowered her head to blow on the edge of the bowl. "The brat who brought you the ginger soup earlier, what's his relationship with you?" Li Nanheng stood opposite her and watched her holding the bowl and wrapped herself in the blanket. He asked with a heavy voice. As Feng Ling blew on the bowl, she lightly replied with a nasal voice, "He's my student." She didn't need to explain too much about herself. Since Li Nanheng had found her, he must have investigated the places she had worked in the past 2 years, the people she had interacted with, and everything that could be investigated. He must also be very clear about her current identity and job. "Student? A male student who specially came to deliver ginger soup to you?" The man's voice was low and cold. Feng Ling took a sip of the ginger soup and furrowed her brows. It was indeed very bad. It tasted extremely bad. It was hot and spicy, but it was undeniable that this thing could indeed make her body feel much warmer after 2 days of cold. "I want to chat with more like-minded people about, young Master Mo, have you kissed enough? Talk about life, and find a confidant." Chapter 10:19. It doesn't matter who he is. After all, he's someone who cares about me. It doesn't seem like there's a need to be antagonized by anyone. Feng Ling's tone was direct. After taking another sip, she said, "Mr. Li, although I know my words may not have any effect, I advise you to take a clear look at yourself. Don't live next door to me anymore. Los Angeles is where you should go. This is Boston. Do I need you to tell me where I should go?" The man looked as if he knew what was going on. He didn't ask any more questions about the girl who gave him the ginger soup. However, his eyes were still filled with displeasure. He glanced at the time and picked up the keys she had left on the shoe rack in front of the door. Why are you taking my key? Feng Ling saw the man's movements. You don't know how to go out and buy medicine when you're this sick? I'll go buy medicine for you. Then why did you take my keys? What if you pretend to be dead inside and refuse to open the door for me after I buy the medicine? The man said matter-of-factly. Feng Ling looked at him coldly. You know I don't want to see you, but you still insist on pestering me? How come I didn't know that apart from being shameless, Mr. Li is also as hard to get rid of as sticky candy? You finally admit that you dumped me. The man glanced back at her. Just as Feng Ling was about to flare up, he opened the door and walked out, closing the door. The door was shut without hesitation. Of course, because he had the key. However, when the door was closed, Feng Ling's expression was inexplicable. What was going on? In a relationship, shouldn't the first person to betray be the one who did the wrong thing? Why did Nanheng look as if she had dumped him? Feng Ling rolled her eyes at the door and raised the bowl in her hand to drink it up. In the end, she suddenly felt so hot and spicy that her whole body stiffened. She resisted the urge to spit it out and forced herself to swallow it. Half an hour later, the man opened the door as if he was opening his own house. Most of the apartment buildings near the Polytechnic University were slightly older. Some of them didn't have electronic room cards or fingerprint locks, so keys were needed. Hearing the movement of the keys in the man's hand, Feng Ling, who had finally finished the bowl of ginger soup, glanced at him and stood up to snatch the keys and the 2 boxes of medicine from his hand. All right, I'll take my medicine before I sleep. You can go. Li Nanheng only raised his hand slightly, and her hand missed his. She failed to grab the keys and stumbled, and almost fell into his arms. Feng Ling hurriedly took a step back and raised her eyes to look at the thing in his hand. She pursed her lips and her eyes were slightly impatient, but she could not be bothered to argue with him. The more she argued with this kind of man, the more excited he would be. She turned and walked back without looking at him. She remembered that the reason she had caught a cold was because of the man's smell in the room, which made her unable to sleep well. If she had known that he lived next door, she would have been prepared to come at any time. She had been frozen for a whole night and had fallen sick. Li Nanheng threw the keys back on the shoe rack, put the medicine on the coffee table, and poured her a glass of water. You just drank the ginger soup. Take the medicine in half an hour. Take the cold medicine and the anti-inflammatory medicine separately. If you don't remember to take it before you sleep, I'll call to remind you. You know my current phone number? Feng Ling asked subconsciously. Is it strange? The man looked at her. Feng Ling turned her head. It was not strange. He was Li Nanheng. Of course it was not strange. Seeing that she was unwilling to speak, Li Nanheng did not say more. He just walked around her room and said, You haven't been out for 2 days. How did you catch a cold? This was a very stupid and embarrassing reason, so Feng Ling did not say it. Li Nanheng had already entered her bedroom and checked the windows inside. The windows were now tightly closed, and there was no air leaking in. However, the air was stuffy. He adjusted the air conditioner to a suitable temperature and looked back at the bathroom with the light on. He walked into the bathroom. Perhaps he did not think of anything, but he subconsciously glanced at the drying rack above. The 2 sets of cute underwear that had been hanging there had been put away. It was empty. Li Nanheng suddenly wanted to laugh at himself. He actually felt a little regretful. After checking that there was no other place in her room that could easily be exposed to the wind or cold, Li Nanheng did not force her to stay for long. Before leaving, he only told her to remember to take the medicine. When he returned to the next door, the man casually took out a bunch of keys from his pocket and put them on the shelf. He looked back at the things on the shelf, sighed, and shook his head with a smile. Her anti-detection ability was indeed not bad, but she still lacked some life experience. She didn't know that she could get another key at any time. Fortunately, she had always hidden it well. Otherwise, if there really were a lot of men who had bad intentions towards her, she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to guard against them. She wouldn't even know how her house was emptied. After all, She was still the Feng Ling, who did not understand many things in the base, but had a cold temperament. No matter what a person did, their nature would not change. Late at night, Feng Ling had slept at home for 2 days. After drinking the ginger soup, she felt hot all over and took the medicine. She remembered to take the anti-inflammatory medicine before going to bed. She was about to go to bed when her phone suddenly rang. She glanced at the caller ID. It was Los Angeles. Without thinking, she knew it was the man next door. She did not answer it, but hung up and went to take the medicine. After taking the medicine, she turned off the light and went to sleep. After turning off the light and lying on the bed, she turned to look out the window and saw the light next door. Did this man like living next door so much? Back then, he used this trick to force her to stay next door, causing their daily lives to be inseparable. Now he was playing the same trick again. A married man. How shameless did he have to be to think that he could use the same trick to trap her heart again and again? Feng Ling retracted her cold gaze and closed her eyes, clearing the man who should no longer exist in her world from her mind. Li Nanheng saw that the light on her side was turned off and glanced at the phone that had been ruthlessly hung up. He put down the phone, opened the window of the balcony and walked out. The place she lived was very quiet. At 11 o'clock in the night, not a sound could be heard. The man lit a cigarette, and there was a flickering spark between his fingers. He casually leaned against the balcony and puffed out a cloud of smoke into the night sky outside. He then turned his face to look at the tightly shut window next door and the dark room with the lights turned off. I want to chat with more like-minded people about, young Master Mo, have you kissed enough? Talk about life and find a confidant. Chapter 1020. 5-amp door was opened and closed. The door opened and closed. With Feng Ling's usual vigilance, she would be able to hear what was going on and would wake up. But her body was cold and hot, and she was powerless. She felt as if someone had come in, but she also felt like she was dreaming. In the dream, she seemed to have a slight fever. Someone's hand was placed on her forehead, and not long after, an ice-cold towel was placed on her forehead. She didn't know how long she had been in this dream. She was half asleep and half awake. When she finally woke up again, it was already 9:20 am. She had asked for 2 days off. She had taken the first 2 days off, but she couldn't do it today. She had to attend a class today, because several students who had just studied in the martial arts club for half a year were going to participate in a competition at school. School competitions paid more attention to specifications and forms, unlike real international competitions that required full strength. However, because they needed sufficient forms, they needed a qualified rehearsal and some forms and movements. She had to arrange them well today. Feng Ling sat up from the bed, took a look at the time, raised her hand to rub her still dizzy and swollen forehead, and got up to wash. When she saw the towel folded there in the bathroom, she was puzzled. She usually hung the towel there. Why was it folded here? She reached out to pick it up, and found that the towel was still a little wet. She suddenly thought of the dream last night. She had a fever, and someone came to take care of her. Was it Li Nanheng? Feng Ling turned and walked out of the bedroom. She walked around all the rooms in the small house, and didn't see anyone else. She remembered that he left before going to bed last night, and didn't come again. She had closed the door and he had returned the key. How could he come here? She put it here after taking a shower last night. But it couldn't be folded here, and it couldn't be dry now. She suddenly turned her eyes to the small balcony outside the window. The balcony on the 15th floor was different from the 2 adjacent balconies in 11 base. The width and distance between them couldn't be crossed easily. This was a matter of life and death. No matter what, Li Nanheng couldn't be so irrational. Then this towel, was it a dream or something? She didn't have much time to think. She quickly changed her clothes and went out. She hadn't recovered from the cold and couldn't drive. She didn't want to be a road killer, so she called a taxi and went to the martial arts club. Classes usually started at 10 a.m., but she was still 15 minutes late. Fortunately, she had called her boss and manager before 10 a.m. to say that she would be there soon, so the students were all waiting for her. After arriving, Feng Ling did not explain her illness. She changed into her usual clothes and entered the classroom. The students were very excited to see her, but they found that Coach Ling, who usually wouldn't sit down for a rest for several hours, had to drink some hot water every 10 minutes or so today, and she had to sit down for a while. Her voice was a little hoarse, and she didn't look very well. There seemed to be some sweat on her forehead. Coach Ling, are you still ill? Did you catch a cold that bad? A few students saw that she was in a bad state and couldn't help but say a few words of concern. I'm fine. It's just a small cold. You guys continue to practice. Feng Ling stood up and walked over. Remember the posture of your hands and legs. Since you're all international students from China and want to show Asian culture and Chinese martial arts in front of students from all over the world, you've just learned for half a year. So you don't need to learn anything too profound for the time being. Just remember to do every movement correctly. With the classical rhythm of the Chinese style, it will definitely be very shocking. Continue to practice. The time before 12 noon today is all yours. If you can't do it, continue in the afternoon. Practice until you pass. But you look very tired. I'm fine. I'll sit for a while when I'm too tired. Feng Ling walked to one of the male students and reached out to straighten his arm. Raise it, straighten it, and lay it flat. Raise it like this, right? Coach Ling, your hands are very hot. Do you have a fever? The male student looked at her worriedly. Looking at her from such a close distance, he could clearly see that her lips were pale, and her hands were indeed abnormally hot. Feng Ling withdrew her hand and did not say much. She just turned and walked back, saying as she walked, "Why are you all looking at me? Continue to practice." Seeing that she insisted, they had no choice but to continue practicing. Coach Ling's temper was not something they could handle. Although she was younger than them, her temper was not something they could handle, so they continued to practice. Just after an hour of Feng Ling's class, the door of the martial arts classroom was suddenly pushed open with great force. The head coach and the boss of the martial arts club outside were both shocked and obviously failed to stop him. Looking at the tall man who walked in quickly, they looked at Feng Ling, who was sitting in front of the classroom and drinking water with some embarrassment. Ling, this gentleman said he came to see you. We said you were in class and it was not convenient for you to see him. But he was very angry and said that you haven't recovered and still have a fever. We actually failed to stop him. They said actually. Who would have thought that Feng Ling's martial arts skills were amazing? It was really a waste of a talent like her to be a coach in their martial arts club. But they didn't expect that this gentleman seemed to be even better than Feng Ling. The head coach originally wanted to stop him, but he was kicked away and almost lost his life. Men always showed their true abilities, especially those who had learned martial arts since childhood. When they saw someone who was more powerful than them, even if they were not convinced, even if they didn't know what was going on in front of them, they still had some instinctive respect in their hearts and were more curious about who this gentleman was. He didn't seem to show his strength, but he was actually so powerful. Feng Ling. Li Nanheng's voice was unusually anxious. Come out and go back with me. Go back. Feng Ling didn't feel that her name was called here. Anyway, it was the same way. She just had an extra surname, a surname that she didn't want to touch anymore. She didn't look up, just looked at the cup of hot water in front of her as if it could bloom flowers, and took another sip of water. Come out with me first. Don't you know you have a fever? I know. I don't do anything here. At most, I just watch my students practice various movements here. I don't need to go on the field to perform. The fever won't kill me, so I don't need to continue to ask for leave. She put down the cup in her hand. I'm here to teach and work for others. Otherwise, the boss will give me so much money for nothing. There's no need to ask for leave all the time. Chapter 1021. Feng Ling pulled out the chair next to her and sat on a slightly more comfortable chair. Boss, head coach, please send the irrelevant people out. Why are the others still in a daze? Continue practicing. Before he could finish his words, Zhang Xian grabbed his wrist. That person strode in from outside the door and grabbed her tightly, not backing down at all. Coach Ling, I have something to tell you. He didn't call her by her name again. Instead, he gave her respect and called her by her current title. He was so strong that she couldn't even pull her hand back. "Can't you see that I'm in class? Mr. Lee, are you always like this? Your matters are always the most important. You have to get what you want. And you have to get the feelings you want. If you want others to wait for you for 3 years, they have to wait for you. No matter how unwilling or wrong they are. They have to listen to your wishes first. Others have to surround you for everything. You're the young master of the Lee family. And I'm an orphan with no parents and no one to rely on. So I have to be bullied by you inside and out. After I get out of the place that belongs to you, do I have to continue to be tortured by you?" Li Nanhing paused and let go. When her black and white eyes were fixed on his, he saw the coldness and wariness in her eyes, as well as the red blood vessels that appeared due to the cold and fever that had yet to subside. Other than the time when he had forced her to point her gun at him, because he had kissed her forcefully and bullied her, she had never looked at him like this before. But it was this look that made Li Nanheng's heart, which had been in pain for 2 years, feel as if even the last drop of blood was about to be drained. The man wanted to say something, but he looked at her, who had been sitting on the chair coldly, and finally said, "I'll wait for you outside." He turned around and walked out directly under the puzzled gazes of the martial arts club owner and the head coach. He even closed the door of the classroom. Under Feng Ling's cold instructions, the students who thought they were watching some love and hate drama hurriedly continued to practice, lest they provoke the cold-faced female coach who seemed to be in a bad mood. However, they could not help but occasionally look in Feng Ling's direction. "So her name is Feng Ling. Which 0 is still the number 0? Or which 0 is a bell? Or a dewy sense of inspiration? It doesn't seem to match her style." Under the curious gazes of a group of people, the cup in Feng Ling's hand suddenly spilled on the ground. The full cup of water fell by her feet and splashed the edge of her trousers, but clearly she did not notice it herself. She still sat there expressionlessly, and her eyes were also indifferent. "What are you looking at?" Feng Ling looked at them expressionlessly. A group of male students thought absent-mindedly. The water in the cup seemed to be very hot. Did she not feel hot at all? Who was that man just now? For so long, they often discussed in private what kind of man could subdue a woman like Coach Ling. It seemed that Chen Beiqing, a rich young master, couldn't suppress her at all. But obviously, the man who just entered the door made them feel that Coach Ling was inferior in all aspects and aura. She raised her eyes to look at the short-haired woman sitting in front of her. She calmly picked up the glass of water from the ground and gently placed it to the side. "If you keep looking at me, I'm going to dismiss the class. Don't come crying to me if you make a fool of yourself in front of all the students in the world." Li Nanheng looked at the time. Time passed by, and Feng Ling still hadn't dismissed the class. He knew how serious she was about everything. She was still the same as before, but the nature of her work was different. But this morning, she still had a high fever of 39 degrees. He stayed by her bed for several hours and fed her antipyretics, but it was obviously not effective. In the morning, he went out to buy her some breakfast, but when he came back, he found that this woman had gone to work. Thinking of the high temperature he felt when he held her wrist just now, the man felt that every minute and second in this room was torture. He opened the door outside, ignoring the owner of the martial arts club and the head coach beside him, intending to go out for some fresh air. The sound of the door closing was deafening. After hearing the sound of the door closing, Feng Ling finally withdrew from her cold and expressionless state and said to the male students who were practicing, "Practice for another half an hour and then rest. At 1 p.m., I'll check again. After confirming that there are no problems, we can end it. You guys continue. I'm going to the bathroom." She got up and walked out of the classroom. She saw the empty reception room and the head coach and boss who were looking at her curiously in front of the office door. She paused for a moment and did not say anything. She looked straight ahead and walked in the direction of the restroom. Feng Ling didn't go to the bathroom. She turned on the faucet and washed her face. The weather was cold, and the water was also very cold. Most of the people in the martial arts club were air-conditioned, so the water in the pipe was not warm at all. It was as cold as the first frost and snow. She splashed some water on her face and the biting chill made her shiver all over. Looking up at the mirror, she saw herself wet. In the narrow space with plenty of light, her pale face had nowhere to hide. Because she was running a fever, there was a very light blush on her cheeks that didn't look particularly normal. If one didn't look closely, they wouldn't be able to see it. But looking at the mirror at such a close distance, they could still see it. She raised her hand and touched her forehead. Then she looked at her hand. Her fingers were white and tender, but there was a thin callus on her palm from holding a gun all year round. Although it was not obvious, it remained in her palm. Just like herself, after she stopped pretending to be a man, everyone who saw her said she was very beautiful, and asked her why she cut her hair so short, and cut off the last bit of femininity. She just smiled faintly, and did not answer. Her hair, her life, just like her hands, looked beautiful to others, but no one knew that she had a thin callus in it that could never be wiped off. As she looked at the mirror, a drop of water rolled onto her palm. She thought she was crying, so she raised her head to look at the woman in the mirror. Her eyes were dry, and other than a little bloodshot, there was no moisture at all. She didn't cry when she was kicked out of 11 base. She didn't cry when she learned that Li Nanheng was married. Of course she wouldn't cry now. In fact, she was a little surprised by her indifference. Why didn't she even shed a tear when she couldn't stand the pain? Feng Ling never thought of herself as a strong person. She only felt that she was a child who grew up drinking wolf's milk, and was born with a heart of stone. She shouldn't have feelings. Chapter 1022. But at this moment, she watched as the head of 11 base, the prestigious young master of the Li family, stayed in Boston because of her. Because of her, he disregarded his status and image, and stepped into such a martial arts club. Thinking of the way the man looked at her just now, her emotions came so suddenly. She suddenly felt that humans were really animals that were easily dominated by emotions. People who shouldn't have feelings shouldn't have so many burdens. He's married, isn't he? Back then, she had never thought of being stubborn, let alone now that he had been married for 2 years. The sound of running water under the tap seemed to cover up the ripples in her heart. Everything was still calm on the surface. She had been peacefully in class for nearly 2 hours. But at this moment, those words suddenly came to her mind. Every single word was drilled into his ears. Feng Ling is young. In fact, it's just a fruitless relationship. Even if she knows about this, she will be sad for a few days. Feng Ling, this kind of unknown orphan, compared to the eldest daughter of the Feng family. As long as one isn't stupid, they would know who to choose. Nowadays, which man would remain faithful to a woman until death? Liking someone doesn't mean he has to take responsibility. A silly girl like Feng Ling isn't suitable for him. People who don't belong to the same world shouldn't force their way in. She should get into a relationship while she's still young. When she grows up, she'll understand not to trust men so easily. This was the ending of the first love in her life. Han Jin was right. Li Nanheng had just given her a lesson. She had gotten what she should have gotten, and lost what she should have lost. That included the first time that he had no memory of. She reeks of alcohol, and can't even arrive on time for training. It's obvious that she had a hangover for an entire night. You say that she adheres to the rules of the base, and that her character is worthy of being tested? We're already being polite enough not to have someone strip you naked. Do you think you can still stay in 11 base? They ridiculed her for being a woman, for disguising herself as a man in the base, for living a disorderly life among men, for being an orphan without any parental discipline, and for easily trusting the feelings of others. She had always thought that Li Nanheng was different. She thought that this man, who could be cold to the bones to others, but doted on her to the bones, treated her differently. She thought that he was sincere enough, and that he could see the good in her. Feng Ling placed her hand on the ice-cold pool and tossed and turned. She thought about all the questions that she had never thought about 2 years ago. She thought that he was different, but the truth was that he was more ruthless than any of them. There wasn't even an explanation. The old man of the Li family made her embarrass herself in front of everyone in the base, and drove her away. It was said that Li Nanheng had been looking for her for 2 years, but today she saw clearly that this man was no different from 2 years ago. When she had a fever this morning, he had indeed entered her home. She didn't even know how he made a copy of her key. If she wanted to fight with this man, she always seemed to be too immature and silly. His family background gave him enough confidence to do whatever he wanted. Even if he knew that she was indifferent to him, he could still find ways to sneak into her life. He was an arrogant man who trampled on her heart and her self-esteem. Whether it was to help her, protect her, or hurt her, he just treated her as an ant and easily wanted to control her heart and her life. It had been 2 years. She had long said goodbye to those past lives. She wanted to stay far away from him. The farther away from him, the better. Feng Ling held the cold pool with force, and her fingertips turned white. They were neither relatives nor friends. They just had a relationship that came and went like the wind. They had written a thick brush stroke in the past of their youth. What was there to affect their mood? She closed her eyes. The next second, scattered scenes appeared out of thin air. She fell into a man's bathtub in the sauna room of the orphanage and fought with him. When she first entered the base, she had a written test with a man on the training ground. Her moves were fierce, which made him feel that something was wrong, but he let her go and didn't investigate further. When she was on a mission, he suddenly appeared and helped her solve the problem behind her. When she fell into the sea on the cruise ship, he was on the other side of the more dangerous terrorist enemy zone. When she was lost on the island, his helicopter suddenly appeared. The mission in the bar. She was dressed as a woman. He pressed her against the wall and kissed her. He blocked bullets for her. He did everything for her. They were together on Roger's Pass day and night. When she killed the commander in the military, he protected her behind him and helped her solve problems again and again. When she was almost killed by the snake, he appeared again and left a small cross scar on her shoulder. He said that she was only 17 years old and was still too young. He asked her to wait for him for 3 years. 3 years later, he would marry her. Feng Ling opened her eyes, looked at herself in the mirror, and pushed back the wet hair and fringe on her forehead. The woman's delicate and white face still looked a little handsome because of this action, but the fringe immediately fell down again. Even though her hair was short, she still looked like a young girl. She could never be a real man, just like how she would never be able to accept a man who was already married. This was a problem that could never be solved in the world. That's it, Feng Ling. He's not worth you thinking about any longer. For the rest of the time, Feng Ling went back to class as if nothing had happened. When it was time for the lunch break, the male students came up one by one to help her back to the office to rest, but she refused. Coach Ling, your name is Feng Ling? Which 0? Someone asked her. Feng Ling didn't answer but just glanced at him coldly, and the other party left dejectedly. She was about to go back to the office, but the head coach was waiting for her in the office. Why didn't you call me to tell me that you're not feeling well after class? Today's classes are just basic lessons. I'll help you look after them. The head coach looked into her eyes. By the way, that man is still outside. Feng Ling nodded and didn't say much. Obviously, she didn't want to go out to see him. Seeing her sitting back at the desk calmly, the head coach asked again. Who is this man? Did you know him before? She was silent for a moment. No matter who he is, you never care about these things. Why did you suddenly ask me today? Because a kid like Chun Beiqing is no match for me. Although the person who came today didn't say much, I felt a clear sense of crisis. At first, Feng Ling didn't understand. After a moment, she looked in surprise at the head coach who was standing in front of the office door with a serious expression. At the same time, she saw the man behind him approaching. Chapter 10:23. Seeing the man approaching, Feng Ling didn't speak anymore, but the head coach's words still startled her. For more than a year, the manager had been taking care of her like an elder. Furthermore, he seemed to be 31 or 32 years old. She had always regarded him as a mentor and helpful friend. She had never thought that he would have other thoughts about her. How could a woman like her, who didn't even have any femininity, be worthy of a man's love? Just her fists alone? The manager sensed the slightly cold gaze behind him. His gaze paused for a moment, before he abruptly turned to look at the tall man approaching from behind. Li Nanheng put one hand in his trouser pocket and held a box of antipyretics that he had just bought from the pharmacy next to the martial arts club. He looked at him coldly and stared straight into his eyes. If you can sense the crisis, it means that you are a smart person. Head coach, you can go back to work first. Feng Ling didn't want the past between her and Li Nanheng to affect others, nor did she want those things to be heard by others. The head coach stood in front of the door without moving. Instead, he looked straight into Li Nanheng's eyes. At the same time, when Li Nanheng was about to enter the door, he suddenly raised his hand and blocked the man's footsteps with one arm. Li Nanheng didn't speak. He glanced at the arm in front of him and then raised his eyebrows to look at him. He didn't speak and even suddenly smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Even Feng Ling, who was sitting behind the desk not far away, vaguely felt a sense of cold danger. Ling is a member of our martial arts club. No matter what your relationship with her is, if she doesn't want to see you and doesn't intend to have anything to do with you, everyone here has the responsibility and obligation to protect her. Sir, I think Ling obviously doesn't want to see you. The head coach also looked fearlessly at the man who was taller than him, a person who practiced martial arts all year round. His eyes were firm. Which eye of yours saw that she didn't want to see me? Li Nanheng was indifferent. Feng Ling originally wanted to say, I really don't want to see you. But at the same time, she felt that if she said this, the head coach would definitely be angry. So she did not speak, but just stood up and walked over. Just as she reached the door, the head coach suddenly turned around and stood in front of her, shielding her behind him as he said, It's okay, I'm here. Feng Ling looked at the tall man in front of her. When she met Li Nanheng's cold gaze, she suddenly glanced at the medicine in his hand. Li Nanheng didn't say much. He just looked at her and handed the medicine box to her. Take the medicine first. The head coach did not speak. He looked at him and then turned back to look at Feng Ling. My fever is not serious anymore. Feng Ling said lightly, I don't need to take medicine. I've been drinking as much water as possible, so it won't be a big problem. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Li, but your concern is really misplaced. You should be concerned about your wife, not me. Hearing this, the head coach didn't know Li Nanheng's identity. Hearing this, his gaze instantly changed, and he stared coldly at the man in front of him. Married? Li Nanheng completely ignored the person in front of him and only looked at Feng Ling indifferently. I asked you to take the medicine. Are you reminding yourself or someone else? Feng Ling didn't want to talk to him anymore, so she simply took the medicine and said, Head coach, you go ahead. I'll talk to him alone. Thank you. The head coach was unhappy because this man was married, but hearing Feng Ling's cold and polite voice, he hesitated and simply gave Li Nanheng a warning look. Regardless of whether Li Nanheng paid attention to his gaze or not, he said in a low voice, I'm in the office next door. Call me anytime. Feng Ling didn't speak. When the head coach left, she raised her hand to Li Nanheng. Give me the key. Li Nanheng's cold brows moved. Because the man in the way had left, the coldness in his eyes dissipated a lot. He looked at her in front of the door. What key? Li Nanheng, don't play dumb with me. When I was still sleeping in the early morning, did you enter my house again? When you took the key out last night, did you directly duplicate the key? Feng Ling looked at him coldly. Give me the key. He didn't expect that although this little woman didn't have much life experience, she was clearly not as easy to fool as before. After all, she had lived outside for 2 years. These 2 years were 2 years that he couldn't fully control and only belonged to her. Li Nanheng smiled. But I made more than one copy. Can you be sure that if I give you a key now, I won't have a second copy in my hand? Feng Ling. Then give me both. What if I made 10 copies yesterday? Or more? Li Nanheng, what do you want? Feng Ling suddenly put down her hand, her eyes impatient. It's not good for you to pester me like this. You're sick. You had a fever in the early morning. I went to take care of you. Is this pestering? I know you're seriously ill, but you still ran out to work. I told you to go back. Is this pestering? And the man took a step forward, stood in front of her, and looked down at her. If caring for you is pestering, then what about that thing just now? Who is the so-called student who sent you the ginger soup? I don't allow you to go to work when you're sick. Is this pestering? Feng Ling didn't want to argue with him. She just frowned and said, I have to work in the afternoon. I don't have the energy to talk nonsense with you here. I'm warning you. Bring me the keys before I go home tonight. Don't casually enter my house again. With that, Feng Ling took the medicine and turned away. She did not look at him again. She returned to the desk and said before sitting down, This martial arts club is my area. Please don't come here again, Mr. Li. Li Nanheng stood there without moving. Feng Ling sat behind the desk and looked up at him. Why aren't you leaving? Li Nanheng was silent for a moment. He walked in, pulled out a chair in front of the desk and sat down. Seeing that he didn't speak, but just sat there, Feng Ling looked at him in confusion. I'm watching you take the medicine. The man glanced at the glass of water in front of her. Feng Ling was silent for a moment, opened the medicine box impatiently, took out 2 pills, and was about to swallow them when the man's voice came again. Don't you know how to take the medicine before taking it? Just 1 is enough. Feng Ling paused. She did not look at the man, but looked down at the instructions written on the medicine box. As he said, she only took 1 pill at a time. It was not good for the body if the medicine was too much. She pursed her lips, put a pill into her mouth, picked up the water, took 2 sips and put it down. All right, can I go? She looked at Li Nanheng. Read the latest chapter of Love is Not Comparable to Your Claw Book House for free. Chapter 1024. Li Nanheng didn't move. He just crossed his straight, slender and strong legs, casually leaned against the back of the chair behind him, and looked at her indifferently. How long have you been in this martial arts club? Feng Ling slowly drank the water in her hand and said disapprovingly, Haven't you already investigated? Is there anything else you don't know? Do you need to ask me? I really don't know how long you work here. The man didn't hide it. He was still calm under her half-mocking tone. 1.5 years, Feng Ling said indifferently, and took another sip of water. 1.5 years? You have been working in such a small martial arts club for so long, which means that your words and your existence have a certain influence in this martial arts club. For example, if you want to recruit an intern coach or assistant, you should be able to decide by yourself, right? Feng Ling was surprised. She abruptly raised her eyes to look at the man sitting there with his legs crossed like a young master. What do you mean? I'm not in charge of 11 base recently. Feng is doing it for me. I'm basically semi-unemployed now. Li Nanheng raised his handsome eyebrows as he spoke. How about staying as your assistant? Coach Ling, please take me in. Feng Ling. No matter how high Feng Ling's guard was, she was still caught off guard by his words. 11 base was not under his management for the time being. He was half unemployed and wanted to be an assistant. Was he asking for shelter? His words seemed to contain several layers of meaning, but she didn't understand. For a moment, she held the cup of water and didn't say anything. She just looked at him strangely. Li Nanheng could tell at a glance that her inexperienced little head couldn't understand this. He put down his legs, sat on the chair, leaned close to her desk, put one hand on her desk, and raised his eyebrows at her. Isn't this place just teaching close-range combat? You learned all these things from me. I should be qualified to be an assistant coach, huh? Feng Ling still couldn't react. She stared at him for a long time before putting down the cup with a cold expression. The cup made a crisp sound when it hit the table. This is not a place for you to mess around, Mr. Li. Please respect my work. I'm asking you to take me in. How is that disrespectful? Feng Ling frowned. You're the boss of 11 base. Why are you here as a coach? Li Nanheng smiled. You are an excellent sniper from 11 base, and the champion of the women's team in close combat. Why are you working as a coach here? I was desperate. I had to find a job that suited me. Do you think everyone is like you? Even if you don't have 11 base, you have the Li family behind you. Even if you don't have the Li family, you have Dr. Qin and Mr. Mo behind you. Li Nanheng's expression did not change, but he still faintly smiled. It seemed that although this little girl usually did not show anything on the surface, in fact, she knew many things very well in her heart. She could even see his frequent contacts with Mo Jingshan and the underground arms business, But she probably didn't know what kind of business he was doing. She only knew that he didn't lack anything. Li Nanheng continued the previous topic. I'm also desperate now. The elders of the Li family were angered by me. They drove me out of the base and wanted to sever ties with me. Now I'm also a poor person. No one wants me. I just don't know if Coach Ling will take me in. Feng Ling was puzzled. Hasn't 11 base been handed over to you long ago? Apart from using their status as elders to suppress your arrogance, how could they have the ability to drive you out of 11 base? Li Nanheng didn't explain, but just looked at her. Don't talk nonsense. We've known each other for so long. You and I don't talk nonsense. Just tell me, do you accept me or not? Feng Ling's eyes were not shaken at all. No. You're so busy every day. Don't you need an assistant or something? Yes. Feng Ling looked at him calmly. But what I need is an assistant, not you. I don't seem to meet the requirements. Why don't I meet the requirements? You don't meet any requirements. For example, which point? Feng Ling's patience was almost at the limit. Why didn't she find that Li Nanheng was such a troublemaker before? Knowing that it was impossible, he still came to challenge her bottom line? You don't meet any requirements at all. If I have to point out one point, all the staff of our martial arts club are unmarried. It's enough that you are married. Our boss said that people who are married and have families are not suitable for this kind of work that focuses on martial arts too frequently, because they can't work too hard. If they get hurt or suffer a little, they will be blamed by their families. They are too burdensome. Well, then I should be standing in the range of the standard. I'm not married to anyone. Li Nanheng looked straight at her. Feng Ling frowned and her eyes suddenly became much colder. Li Nanheng, shameless as you are, it doesn't mean that you can lie to get in here. Even if you don't like Feng Mingzhu, she is still your wife. Don't you think it's shameless for you to ignore her existence and hook up with others? I'll say it for the last time. I didn't marry Feng Mingzhu. And I didn't marry anyone. I didn't marry anyone, understand? Li Nanheng's hand was still on the table in front of her, and he looked straight at her. Even if I die now, no so-called wife will come out to settle the score. Of course, if you are willing to become my wife and play the role of finding trouble for others for me, I will be very happy. Feng Ling coldly looked at him. You didn't marry anyone? Are you trying to say that the major mainstream media in Los Angeles 2 years ago are fake? Li Nanheng, give me another year. When the time is up, you will know everything you should know. I don't want to know. Feng Ling directly interrupted him. I am not a 3-year-old child. I am not so easy to deceive. I like you and love you. That's why I coax you like a 3-year-old child. Li Nanheng's patience was surprisingly good. I don't like you or love you. I'm afraid you can't even see my face. Such an obvious difference in treatment. Can't you feel it? Or are you deliberately pretending that your eyes are not good? Feng Ling's expression did not change. Whether you're married or not, it has nothing to do with me. Li Nanheng, in my world, if something ends, it's over. No matter if it's because of a misunderstanding, the truth, or being forced to leave, or whatever. There's no point in looking back. Right now, I'm sitting here talking to you instead of angrily asking someone to chase you out. This shows that I'm very calm. So please leave calmly, okay? Baidu read the latest chapter of The Warm Wind is Not As Good as Your Love Claw Bookhouse for free. Chapter 1025. Li Nanheng smiled faintly and said lightly, Isn't the reason why you didn't ask someone to drive me out because you were afraid that they would be hurt? Feng Ling, what are you trying to do? I'm waiting for you to take me in. Do you need me to take someone like you in? Even if I take you in, the result will be the same. There's no possibility between us. Feng Ling had already made her words clear enough. Li Nanheng nodded seriously. Then I'll just take you in. I won't seduce you. I'll be your assistant obediently. How about that? Feng Ling. Written on the man's forehead were the words trap. She raised her hand to her forehead and closed her eyes. Finally, she took out a business card from the drawer and threw it in front of him with no expression on her face. I won't accept it even if you say it until you die. If you want to humiliate yourself like this, the KTV next door is recruiting waiters. I think you meet their standards in all aspects. Li Nanheng sat there without moving. Looking at the business card she threw in front of him, he glanced at her with a puzzled expression. Feng Ling explained to him, "This is the phone number of the KTV boss." Li Nan glanced at her with a hint of danger in his eyes. Feng Ling didn't want to talk to him anymore. She stood up and brushed past him with a cold expression. She turned and entered the classroom without looking back. At 4 p.m., Chen Beiqing would come to class at this time. In order to avoid Li Nanheng, Feng Ling did not leave the classroom for the entire afternoon. She was too lazy to ask him if he had left or not. Anyway, she did not have much strength right now, so she simply sat in the classroom and waited for the next class to come. When Chen Beiqing walked into the classroom, he saw that Feng Ling had just handed the empty cup in her hand to a student and asked him to fetch a cup of hot water for her. He took a few glances outside and walked in. "You haven't recovered yet, and you're already coming to work?" Feng Ling glanced at him and did not respond. When the student brought the cup back to her, she thanked him and put it aside. Chen Beiqing came over and was about to touch her forehead when she looked away and glanced at him. "What are you doing?" Chen Beiqing's hand paused in the air. Realizing that her cold and hard temper made her very resistant to being touched by him, he had to put down his hand. "I want to see if you have a fever, because you look very pale." "It's just a cold, it's not that serious. In a while you'll be on time for class. You're all very familiar with your movements. Just do as I say," Feng Ling said and glanced outside. Seeing that other students had arrived one after another, she didn't say anything. But when Chen Beiqing was about to go to class, Feng Ling remembered the bowl of ginger soup he specially sent to her. She seemed to be too cold, so she added, "Thank you for the bowl of ginger soup." This was probably the first time he had heard her take the initiative to speak to him, since he had pursued her for so long. And it was also the first time he heard her not speak so coldly. Chen Beiqing looked back at her, smiled, and was about to speak when he heard the second half of Feng Ling's words. "But please don't go to my house anymore. I don't like other people to disturb my home, and I don't like strangers to touch my private life too closely." Chen Beiqing looked at her for a while and suddenly stood still. His hands hung by his sides. After a moment, he licked the left side of his cheek, turned around, and pressed his hands against the wall behind her. Feng Ling was still sitting there against the wall. She was caught off guard by his sudden action, and when she came to her senses, she had been trapped by Chen Beiqing, whom she had always regarded as a student. Her eyes paused and then turned cold. "What are you doing? Class is about to begin. Don't be like this. What's wrong with me? I've pursued you for so long, but I haven't even received a smile from you. You caught a cold, and I wanted to go to your address and send you a bowl of ginger soup. But you didn't let me in, and instead, I received your disgust. Tell me, what should I do?" Although the man in front of her was only in his early 20s and was just an international student, his gentleness was mixed with some displeasure and indignation at this moment. He bent down and looked at her closely, staring straight into her cold eyes. "Back then, you suddenly appeared in front of me in the parking lot and jumped into my world. I couldn't control my growing love for you, but I also tried my best to pursue you slowly and not to annoy you. Why? It's just a bowl of ginger soup. Are you afraid that someone will intrude into your life too forcefully? Or are you resisting something? I feel that what you're resisting is not just me, but you completely trapped yourself in a very narrow corner and refused anyone to approach your heart. Have you ever been hurt? Can't you say it out? Do you have to hold it in like this?" Feng Ling didn't expect that the man who had always been gentle and polite to her, and even if she didn't accept the flowers, would suddenly turn around. It really gave her a fright. At the same time, before she recovered from the shock and had time to push him away, the door of the classroom suddenly opened again. "Aling, this Mr. Li." The boss entered the door with a fawning expression. He originally wanted to discuss something with Feng Ling, but the moment he entered he saw this scene. His eyebrows twitched, and he choked on his words. The man who came in behind the boss of the martial arts club was tall and straight. He had changed into the coach's martial arts club uniform like Feng Ling's. His cold eyes became even colder when he saw the scene inside, and he stared coldly at the woman who was almost imprisoned against the wall by force. As soon as she met Li Nanheng's eyes, Feng Ling was startled. When she saw the clothes he was wearing, she seemed to understand something and stared at the boss. "Boss you?" The boss of the martial arts club said awkwardly and fawningly. "I think you work too hard. You're so tired that you're sick. I've been planning to find an assistant for you. It happens that Mr. Li is good at martial arts and volunteered to be an assistant coach. Let him follow you from now on." Apply. Did Li Nanheng need to apply? The purpose of running a martial arts club was to make money. She didn't know how much money Li Nanheng had spent to make the boss look so embarrassed. He knew that she would definitely not agree, but he still brought this bastard in. Feng Ling was about to speak with a cold face, when her chin was suddenly pinched by Chen Beiqing and turned around. Read the latest chapter of Love Claw Book House Can't Match Your Warmth for free. Chapter 1026. She froze for a moment, then turned her gaze back to Chen Beiqing, who still hadn't let go of her. The air in front of the door almost froze at this moment. "Speak. In the future, don't suddenly change the topic, or look at someone else when I'm talking to you. I'm not only your student here, but I'm also a man who likes you." Chen Beiqing looked at her seriously and said word by word. His words were clearly heard by her, as well as by the boss and the man behind him. The boss was dumbfounded. "Student Chen, what are you doing? Coach Ling is like half a teacher to you." "You." Chen Beiqing didn't even look back. He still held Feng Ling's chin with his hand and said firmly, "A teacher 3 years younger than me? What era was it now? It's just a teacher-student relationship in the martial arts club. Can't I like him?" The boss choked. Of course, it was not that he couldn't like her, but everyone knew Coach Ling's temper. In order to keep Ling, no matter how difficult it was to deal with her, he, as the boss, would try his best to tolerate her. Now it was already very risky to bring Mr. Li in as an assistant, and she obviously didn't want to accept it. Now student Chen was putting himself at risk. If Ling couldn't accept it and resigned, then the martial arts club would suffer the biggest loss. The boss hesitated for a moment. Seeing that Coach Ling was restrained by Chen Xiaobei against the wall, and that she seemed to be weak and uncomfortable, she couldn't get rid of Chen Xiaobei. Even her struggle was easily restrained by Chen Xiaobei. The boss couldn't stand it anymore. He was about to go over to help, but before he could, Chen Xiaobei had already walked over. "Let go of me first." Feng Ling glanced at the man who was approaching her coldly, and immediately frowned. She looked at Chen Beiqing, who seemed to want an explanation from her. "Let go of me, do you hear me? I've been very patient. It's been more than a year. What else do you want me to do?" Chen Beiqing looked down at her. Suddenly, he felt a weight on his shoulder, followed by a faint stabbing pain. He subconsciously turned his eyes to look at the tall man behind him. Before he could see the other person's face clearly, he felt the man's hand on his shoulder. It didn't seem to be doing much, but it was slowly pressing down, causing waves of pain and numbness to spread through his entire arm. When he saw the person behind him clearly, he only saw that there was no extra expression on the cold face. It seemed like the wind was blowing, and the clouds were calm, but it made people feel an inexplicable chill down their spines. "She wants you to get lost. Don't you understand?" Li Nanheng held his shoulder and easily dragged him to the side. Chen Beiqing had only learned some simple self-defense skills in the martial arts club. In front of people like Li Nanheng, his kung fu was nothing, but at least he studied hard and had a good foundation. When he was thrown away, he didn't look too embarrassed. He just took 2 steps back and looked at Li Nanheng in surprise and coldly. "What are you doing?" Chen Beiqing's eyes, which had always been gentle, were filled with anger and determination because of his unhappiness just now. But because of Li Nanheng's push, he became sober. Li Nanheng's expression remained unchanged. He glanced indifferently at Feng Ling, who was still sitting there with pale lips, and then shifted his indifferent gaze to the boy who was not afraid of death. His tone was low and cold, and he asked, "What are you doing?" "I'm talking to her. Didn't you see? I'm now the assistant of Coach Ling. She doesn't seem to be in good health, and can't stand anyone's rude attitude. Are you sure you were talking normally just now?" Li Nanheng looked at him coldly. If it weren't for the fact that this was Feng Ling's temporary home, this boy's hand that pinched her chin just now would have been crippled. Assistant? Chen Beiqing was so focused on Feng Ling that he didn't pay much attention to the introduction of the martial arts club boss just now. Now he noticed that there seemed to be something wrong. How could an assistant look more powerful than the boss? His expression did not change, but his eyes looked at Li Nanheng up and down. After thinking for a while, his eyes fell on Feng Ling again. Feng Ling sat there without moving. She really didn't have much strength right now. Although she felt that her fever should have subsided a lot after taking the antipyretic, perhaps the antipyretic had a little sleeping effect. So she had been a little sleepy. But now, her sleepiness was stimulated by this scene. She just sat there listlessly. She didn't have the energy to deal with the mess in front of her. She just didn't want to bother about it. She raised her hand and waved. Okay, let's go to class. Chen Beiqing didn't speak but just looked at her. Obviously, he didn't intend to let it go. At this time, the boss suddenly said with a smile, "Well, it's indeed time for class. Classmate Chen, after all, there are still many students waiting. Let's talk about personal issues after class. Besides, this is the first time that Coach Li comes to work this afternoon. He will be one of your coaches in the future. Don't leave a bad impression on him. Go to class." At this time, Feng Ling abruptly turned to look at the man who was looking down at her. She wanted to roll her eyes, but seeing that there were too many people here, she held back and only said in a low voice, "Boss, the assistant position hasn't been decided yet. I'll tell you after class. You happen to be in poor health recently, and you don't have enough energy. Since Coach Li is such a good fighter, and is willing to stay as your assistant, I can't let him stay as an assistant all the time. I just want him to be familiar with the environment, working methods, and curriculum of our martial arts club. I estimate that within 2 or 3 months, he will be able to teach these students alone and directly be promoted to a main class coach like you. I just want him to help me explain the affairs of our martial arts club to him. Don't think it's troublesome. Now we are in need of talents. I really don't want to turn away such a good fighter." These words seemed to be said with sincerity. The boss had clearly seen Li Nanheng barging in this morning. He clearly knew that there was a grudge between him and her. But he still went against his principles to arrange for him to be by her side. If Li Nanheng didn't take out some money to settle this matter, she would cut off her head and let him kick it like a ball. I want to chat with more like-minded people about young Master Mo. Have you kissed enough? Talk about life. And find a confidant. Please remember the domain name of this book. For mobile version website, M. Chapter 1027. No matter how impatient Feng Ling was, the boss had already spoken. She then waved her hand. All right, you guys go to class first. I'm going out. If there's anything, call me in the office. With that, he turned around and slipped away. Feng Ling suppressed her anger and didn't bother to look at the man next to her. She just glared at Chen Beiqing, who was standing there, as if he wouldn't give up until he made things clear. Hurry up and go to class. Seeing that she didn't seem to be in a good mood, Chen Beiqing endured it. Under the gaze of a group of students in the classroom, he pushed his cheeks with the tip of his tongue again, turned around, and walked into the line with a sullen face. He went to his usual seat in class. It wasn't until the group of students began to prepare themselves for class that the classroom returned to its usual quiet and orderly state. Feng Ling sat in her seat and turned to look at Li Nanheng. Li Nanheng also stood on the spot. He glanced sideways and lowered his head to look at her. His brows were slightly raised. Seeing his obviously proud expression, Feng Ling glared at him harshly and swallowed the words in her throat. In the end, she said with an ugly expression, "What are you looking at? Do you think it's so easy to be my assistant? Do you think you can get a free salary just by standing here staring at me?" The man smiled faintly. "So, what does Coach Ling need me to do now? From the standard basic movements these people are doing, you can tell what they are learning. Go and see for yourself. Whose posture is not standard and who's bad. Go and supervise them. I'll sit here and rest." Feng Ling instructed coldly. Hearing her commanding tone, Li Nanheng frowned and chuckled. "All right. With that, the tall man walked into the classroom. Looking at the man's back, Feng Ling raised her head and rolled her eyes helplessly toward the ceiling. Then, a few minutes later, Feng Ling heard the screams of several students who didn't perform particularly well. Hearing those screams, she could imagine the scene. Ah, be gentle. Even if he is a coach, he is just an assistant to Coach Ling temporarily. Besides, you are a newcomer. Do you know how to teach? It hurts so much. Ah. Hearing the continuous cries inside, Feng Ling closed her eyes. To be personally taught this set of movements by Li Nanheng, the students didn't know whether they were lucky or unlucky. After all, she had learned most of her skills at 11 base, and he had taught her a lot. One had to know that this newcomer was not an exaggeration to say that he was their founder. Ah, my mother, my bones are going to break. Be gentle, help. Coach Ling, help. Help. After half of the class, the students realized that Coach Ling's usual strictness and indifference were very gentle in front of this new assistant coach. This person was the real devil. When Feng Ling felt a little better, she got up and entered, only to see that the group of students were doing push-ups on the ground, as if they were better off dead. They were doing the most basic balance training, which was the simplest single body balance posture. Ordinary people would tremble all over if they couldn't even hold it for 30 seconds. Looking at the current state of the students, it had probably been more than 5 minutes. It was just like when Li Nanheng dragged her out to do devil training in the middle of the night. Especially Chen Beiqing, who had some doubts about Li Nanheng, because Li Nanheng had dragged him away just now. It was not that women were very sensitive, but men were also particularly sensitive to certain things. For example, the indifference and hostility of this new assistant coach to him was very obvious. Obviously, it was cruel for everyone to just hold the ground with their bare hands for 5 minutes. And some people couldn't hold it anymore, and had already fallen to the ground. And Chen Beiqing didn't just do the same. Li Nanheng stood half a meter away from him, and kicked his leg. Straighten. Lengthen. Your knee is bent. I told you to straighten, can't you understand? Don't shake your hand. You're a big man, and you can't even hold the balance for 5 minutes? What kind of man are you? Chen Beiqing gritted his teeth secretly. He was about to lose his temper. But when he turned his eyes, he suddenly saw Feng Ling standing at the door. He immediately maintained the same steady posture, and didn't say anything. But the sweat on his forehead revealed what he had been through. Li Nanheng, come out, Feng Ling said coldly. Li Nanheng looked back at her and said indifferently, Coach Ling, what can I do for you? Or are you not satisfied with my way of education? No, come out. Let's talk, Feng Ling said, and turned to walk to the bench outside the classroom. Li Nanheng didn't move. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of Chen Beiqing's movement. Seeing that Chen Beiqing's leg was about to relax, he suddenly raised his foot and kicked him hard in the leg. Chen Beiqing immediately staggered to the ground in pain, and then suddenly raised his head and glared at him. Your movement is not standard. Do it again. Li Nanheng glanced at him coldly and turned to leave. The people around them didn't say much until the tall figure had left. Only then did they all turn around and look at student Chen, who seemed to be especially targeted, with sympathetic eyes. Cough, well, Beiqing, are you okay? Chen Beiqing got up and looked down at his leg, which was almost broken by the kick just now, because everyone else was still doing it, and there were surveillance cameras in the classroom. If he stood here for too long, Coach Ling might say something when she checked the surveillance cameras in the classroom, so he bent down and continued to do it. But when he bent down and put his hands on the ground, he looked out, only to see that Li Nanheng had gone out, and he couldn't help cursing. Damn! As if feeling the hostile gaze behind him, Li Nanheng didn't stop. When he walked out of the classroom, he suddenly looked back and met Chen Beiqing's unhappy gaze. The two men just looked at each other silently. Chen Beiqing didn't avoid his gaze, nor did he make any unnecessary movements. He just looked at him directly. Li Nanheng put one hand in his trouser pocket and snorted coldly, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. He left. When he left the classroom, he saw Feng Ling standing a few meters away, waiting for him. It was just that he had a serious expression on his face, and it was obvious that he wasn't going to say anything nice. I want to chat with more like-minded people about young Master Mo. Have you kissed enough? Talk about life, and find a confidant. Please remember the domain name of this book. For mobile version website, M. Chapter 1028. Feng Ling looked up at him. Hearing that he came out, Feng Ling looked up at him. The man's eyes were so calm that it seemed that he was just working seriously and didn't have any other thoughts at all. She frowned and said, "What do you want?" "I said this place is not suitable for you, and I don't intend to take you in. So you put your hands on my boss, right? Li Nanheng, you don't lack money. What you lack is time. Do you have to waste your time on me?" Coach Ling, Li Nanheng said indifferently. "Isn't it time for class? Are you sure you want to discuss these irrelevant things with me at this time?" Feng Ling paused and then glared at him fiercely. "Don't call me Coach Ling. Then what should I call you?" Li Nanheng smiled faintly. His voice was low and slightly hoarse, but also seemed to be inexplicably bewitching. "Or should I call you boss instead? Feng Ling." She looked at him as if he was crazy. "How do you feel? Do you have a headache?" Li Nanheng changed the topic at the right time, when she was about to lose her temper. Feng Ling didn't look at his concerned eyes, turned her face away expressionlessly, took a step back, sat on the chair behind her, and said coldly, "It's just a cold. I won't die." "Then sit down and teach me today's class," the man said and turned to go back. "Wait a minute." Feng Ling abruptly stopped him. "I definitely won't let you stay. If you insist on teaching this class for me, then go ahead. Just treat it as you owe me. But let me warn you, they are all my students and have nothing to do with me. Don't vent your anger on anyone because of your personal anger." Li Nanheng seemed not to hear her. He slowed down for a moment when she spoke, but only for a moment. Then he walked in without looking back. Feng Ling sat outside and raised her hand to rub her aching head. The boss must be crazy. How could he really take him in? For this group of students, this lesson couldn't be described with just the word deep water. But since they all came to the martial arts club to learn, of course, they were interested in this aspect, and must have seen all kinds of relevant learning materials and videos. The new assistant coach's skills were obviously not simple, but they didn't know who he was. Although everyone thought he was too strict and ruthless, he did teach very well, and to a high standard. Coach Ling was already the best fighter in the entire martial arts club, and the best teacher. But the arrival of this new assistant manager, only then did they realize that there were still people who could be colder, stricter, and more terrifying than Coach Ling. They were also faster, better, and more powerless to resist. It was precisely because of Li Nanheng's ruthlessness that these students still secretly asked for Li Nanheng's phone number, hoping to build a good relationship with this new coach, so that they wouldn't be targeted like Chen Beiqing in class in the future. TSK. Speaking of student Chen, what he experienced tonight was simply inhuman torture. He was forced to do balance support training for half an hour, plus other difficult movements, each of which was like picking his bones. But he couldn't refuse and had to listen to Coach Li's instructions. When the class was finally over, he didn't even have the strength to call out Coach Ling's name, let alone think about Coach Ling. He lay on the ground dejectedly, too lazy to move. In the end, he was kicked by Coach Li, who warned him that lying on the ground was too easy and twisted his waist. After intensive training, lying on the ground like this would only distort his tight muscles and joints. He told him to get up and leave immediately, or stand up and lean against the wall. Chen Beiqing's anger and temper were all gone now. He didn't want to say a word. Today was also the first time that she was not invited to dinner after Chen Beiqing's class. Although she refused him every time, he was used to sending flowers before coming and asking if she wanted to have dinner with him before leaving. Even if he was refused, it had become a habit of his. But today, the office door that was supposed to be knocked on was pushed open by another man. It was not Chen Beiqing, but Li Nanheng, who had changed back to his black casual sportswear. "Boss Feng, come home from work. Shall I send you back?" Li Nanheng stood in front of the door, looking as if he was working hard. He looked like a proper person, And it really seemed like that was the case. The corner of Feng Ling's mouth twitched because he called her boss Feng. She really didn't want to talk to him. But this man was so determined in her life that she really couldn't imagine what he wanted to do next. If you want to go back by yourself. I'll take a taxi back. Feng Ling lowered her head to sort out the lesson plans and videos on her desk, saying, "Also, please move away from my room next door." In just a few days after finding her, this man had occupied almost all of her living space. She was really caught off guard. She didn't know how to deal with it. "You know I live next door. It's convenient for you to drive or take a taxi. Why do you take a taxi?" "I still have things to do." Feng Ling didn't look at him. Li Nanheng took out a cigarette from his trouser pocket and said indifferently, "Go ahead. I'll send you back when you're done." With that, he went out to light a cigarette. Feng Ling sat in the office, and the man smoked near the bathroom outside. About 10 minutes later, the man came back, but Feng Ling was still sitting behind the desk. He took a chair and sat down without speaking. She didn't speak either. As time passed, everyone else had left, and only the two of them were left in the martial arts club. Seeing that he really didn't leave, Feng Ling looked up at him. But at the moment she raised her eyes, they suddenly met the man's eyes. He had been looking at her. At the moment when their eyes met, many images of the past suddenly appeared in Feng Ling's mind. Who would have thought that the person in charge of 11 Base would condescend to live in a cheap rental house in a place like Boston, and come to such a small martial arts club to beg to be her assistant? Even when she said she was busy, he would sit there quietly and obediently and patiently wait for her to finish her work without saying a word, like a child who had done something wrong and was trying to make up for it and waiting for the adults to forgive him. I want to chat with more like-minded people about young Master Mo. Have you kissed enough? Talk about life and find a confidant. Chapter 1029. She held a pen in her hand, and when her fingers met the man's gaze she tightened slightly. But only for a moment. She looked away, lowered her head, and continued to work. In the end, she couldn't delay any longer. Feng Ling put down the pen in her hand, and when she raised her eyes, she saw that the man was still looking at her. "I'm done." The man's patience had been extended infinitely. He looked at her impatiently. "I'll send you to the hospital. If we pass by the hospital, I'll send you to the hospital first." "There's no need to go to the hospital. In the past, I went to the battlefield where the terrorists were, and I didn't die in the Snake Valley. It's just a cold." Feng Ling got up to pack her things. After she was almost done, she walked around the desk and walked out. Don't take a cold lightly. In recent years there have been many classic medical cases. All kinds of diseases start from the symptoms of a cold, Li Nanheng said, glancing at the sky outside. "Wear more clothes. Don't catch a cold again." Wasn't it all thanks to him that she had a cold and sweaty feeling before? They hadn't seen each other for 2 years. This man had only appeared for a few days, but he had turned the world that she thought was peaceful upside down. Feng Ling didn't speak. She picked up her bag, brushed past the man, and walked out without looking back. However, she had only taken a few steps when the tall, long-legged man took the bag in her hand. Her hand was empty. She turned her eyes abruptly, only to see that the man took her bag to the side of the car, opened the door, and threw the bag in. At the same time, he opened the door and motioned for her to get in. Seeing that she didn't move, Li Nanheng was still patient. "Come here." Feng Ling didn't want to get in his car, but her bag and cell phone were there. She didn't drive here today because she was not feeling well. Now she wanted to take a taxi back, but she didn't have any money. She couldn't go back empty-handed, and her key was also in her bag. She abruptly walked over, walked past the man, and reached out to pick up the bag thrown on the seat. However, the moment she picked it up and was about to turn away, the man behind her suddenly blocked her in front of the car door. Feng Ling abruptly turned around and almost bumped into his arms. She staggered back a step, and his dark gaze lowered his head to look at her indifferently. He placed his hands on both sides of the car door, trapping her between him and the car. "Li Nanheng." Feng Ling's heart instantly jumped because of his sudden oppression. She raised her eyes and looked at him coldly. Get out of the way. Li Nanheng lowered his eyes to look at the woman who was as cold as ever, and did not let go. He raised his hand, and gently pinched her chin. His warm fingertips gently rubbed her chin, and he narrowed his eyes coldly. It was indeed a wise move to allow you to disguise as a man and mingle with me. Now your hair is still ridiculously short, but you don't lack pursuers at all. A coach, a student, and this is just a martial arts club. If one day you are discovered by more people, I may not be able to squeeze in even if I want to snatch you. Feng Ling raised her hand to slap his hand away, but the moment she slapped his wrist, the man let go of her chin and held her hand at the same time, pulling her into his arms. Feng Ling lost her balance and was caught unprepared. The moment she fell into his arms, she frowned and looked at the man in front of her unhappily. I told you to let go. Looking at her eyes, Li Nanheng's expression was cold, and he said word by word. Feng Ling, I'll say it again. I'm not married, and I'm not married to anyone. Don't stare at me with this disgusted look, as if you're looking at a married scumbag. Feng Ling tried to pull her hand out of his palm, but the man not only refused to let go, but pressed her hand against his chest, holding it very tightly. He had no intention of letting go. Whether you're married or not has nothing to do with me, she said angrily. Let go. Nothing to do with you. Seeing that she didn't seem to care, Li Nanheng's eyes were filled with anger. Since you don't care, why didn't you think of looking for me when you were driven out of the base? Why did you use such a meticulous anti-reconnaissance method to avoid everyone's sight? 2 years. I've been looking for you for 2 whole years. Even if you can't see my sincerity now, and you can't forgive me immediately, at least don't look at me like you're looking at a disgusting person. My heart is used to love you, not to be disgusted by you, understand? Feng Ling couldn't break free from his hand, so she simply raised her other hand and slapped him hard. Are you done or not? Don't talk to me about love or not. I've never thought about these questions. You led me astray in love. Now I'm just trying to find the right direction in life. Don't think that your charm is so boundless that women will be subdued by you as soon as you appear. Let me tell you, it's useless for me. I just want to live alone peacefully now. I don't have a big goal, and you are not my goal in life. If possible, I can give you the gift you gave to Chun Beiqing today. I want you to stay away from me. Her gaze was too firm. Her eyes were filled with strong rejection towards him. It was as if the fact that he was already married, regardless of whether it was true or not, there was already a layer of frost in her heart. It was as if no one could easily break through her heart that was made of ice. Li Nanheng was silent for a moment, and then let go of her hand. Get in the car first. I'll send you back. I won't get in your car. Feng Ling took advantage of the moment he let go of her hand and pushed him. Don't make trouble. You're still sick. The man didn't speak anymore, and gestured for her to get in the car with his eyes. Otherwise, he had no intention of letting her go, let alone let her go far away by herself. Feng Ling frowned. I'll only send you back. I won't enter your house. Then I don't need you to send me back. Don't talk nonsense. Li Nanheng's patience finally reached its limit. He looked at her coldly. Get in the car. The two of them stared at each other coldly for a long time. In the end, Feng Ling didn't want to face him like this anymore. She suddenly pushed him away by an arm's length, turned around and entered the car. She slammed the door shut, blocking the man's gaze and the strong familiar scent on him when he was so close to her. Chapter 1030. On the way back, Li Nanheng didn't say anything. He let her sit in the back and rest with her eyes closed. After sending her home, he watched her enter the house and slam the door, but he didn't intend to come in. After closing the door, Feng Ling locked the door from the inside and buckled the hidden lock inside the door. After making sure that even if he had the key, he couldn't open the last hidden lock outside, she turned back to the bedroom. She took the time to take the thermometer to take her temperature. Although she had taken medicine during the day, it was still more than 38 degrees. No wonder she had been feeling uncomfortable. She went to take a shower. After drying her hair, she inadvertently glanced outside. The light next door had never been turned on. Feng Ling withdrew her gaze and turned to boil water for herself. It had nothing to do with her whether the light was on or not. The next morning, after getting up, she really didn't have the strength to go for a morning run today, nor did she want to make food. She sat on the sofa and closed her eyes for another hour. When it was almost time for work, she got up and was about to go out, when she suddenly heard the sound of a message coming in. She picked up the phone and saw a message from Li Nanheng. Eat less bread, salad, and jam during your illness. I bought you Chinese breakfast porridge. She pushed the door open and went out. Sure enough, on the small shelf outside the door, there was breakfast. Several round boxes were neatly placed in a plastic bag. She suddenly remembered that when she was at 11 base, Xiao Su once said, Boss Li was a typical arrogant person. Nothing could easily enter his eyes. There were really few people who could be treated and cherished by him so patiently and carefully. Even if they could get a little care and protection from him, they definitely stood at the top of his heart. Feng Ling glanced at those things, but didn't take them. She closed the door, picked up her coat, put on her shoes, and pushed the door out. She didn't even take a look at the breakfast. She passed by, pressed the elevator, and went to work. She arrived at the martial arts club 40 minutes earlier than usual. Seeing that she was early, the head coach asked her if she had had breakfast. When he learned that she hadn't eaten yet, he went to buy her some hot milk and some breakfast biscuits to fill her stomach. At 10 o'clock, Feng Ling was sitting behind her desk eating breakfast biscuits. At this time, the office door was pushed open, and her new assistant Li Nanheng came to report on time. He glanced at the food she was eating and asked without batting an eyelid, "What time does class start?" Feng Ling glanced at him. She didn't expect him to actually plan to work here. She glanced at the time, picked up another biscuit, and said coldly, "Right away." However, when he was about to change his clothes, he glanced at the breakfast biscuits on her table out of the corner of his eye. At the same time, he saw a bag of the same biscuits on the head coach's desk next door. His eyes turned cold and he turned to leave. In the past 10 days, Li Nanheng was taken in by the boss of the martial arts club. The one who suffered the most was Chen Beiqing, who was tortured every time he came to class. In particular, Chen Beiqing habitually asked someone to send flowers to Feng Ling before class. Previously, the flowers were picked up by the cleaning auntie and placed in the vase as decorations. Now, he couldn't even enter the martial arts club. Except for Feng Ling and the head coach, all the staff in the martial arts club said in unison that the weather had been cold recently. Their noses were uncomfortable, and they couldn't stand the smell of flowers or pollen, especially roses. In the past 10 days, Feng Ling saw the warm breakfast outside the door every morning and walked by expressionlessly as usual. She didn't eat a bite, but she still saw the breakfast outside the door on time every morning. Every night, in order not to be forced into the car again, she drove to and from work by herself. Li Nanheng had been following her, not too close nor too far, but he didn't say anything. When she went home, the man was also not too far away from her, as if they were really colleagues on the way home. But when she walked out of the elevator, he didn't say anything. She went home, but he watched her outside, didn't come in and didn't speak. Every time she closed the door at night, the more miserable Chen Beiqing was the next day. Twice, he lay on the ground and couldn't get up. He felt that he was about to be crippled by the new coach Li. But when he went to the hospital for a checkup, he found that he was not injured at all. However, the movements that Coach Li asked him to do were all movements that could make people exhausted. They did not seem to have many ups and downs, but in fact they were very tiring. The kind of tiredness that could kill him after a long time. After 10 peaceful days, when Chen Beiqing heard a crisp sound from his arm again, he suddenly turned pale from the pain and tried to pull his hand back, but Nanheng looked at him coldly. "The muscles and bones in your arm are so fragile. You can't even twist and balance. I'm afraid that even if you study here for another 10 years, you will still be a waste." Chen Beiqing was in so much pain that his forehead was sweating. He endured the pain, looked up at Coach Li who had been twisting his arm to the limit, and smiled at him. "Do you really think I can't see why you are targeting me? We are all men. If we want to compete, we should be fair. Don't use your identity to target me. Are you sure Coach Ling can't see through your tricks? Li Nanheng looked at him indifferently and didn't hide anything. He smiled and said in a voice that only he could hear, I'm afraid you won't have a chance to see my real means in this life. When you see it, you'll be dead. Chen Beiqing smiled, but the sweat on his forehead was still dripping. I just like two women at the same time. I accept fair competition. Li Nanheng smiled coldly. The moment Chen Beiqing said fair competition, he kicked Chen Beiqing's knee over. Chen Beiqing grunted and suddenly fell to the ground. His eyes were cold and his voice was as cold as a glacier. If you want to compete with me fairly, I'm afraid you'll have to cultivate for a few more years. Chen Beiqing was indeed in pain, but it was a lie to say that it wasn't painful. He gritted his teeth, stood up, looked up at Li Nanheng and sneered. If you like a woman, confess your love to her. Don't play these useless tricks here. Even I despise you, let alone her. I don't think she is nice to you at all. I'm afraid you have been rejected countless times. However, with another kick, Chen Beiqing staggered and fell to the ground again. Chapter 1031. Chen Beiqing endured the sharp pain all over his body. The moment he raised his head, he heard the man's condescending and cold voice. When I was honest with my woman, you were still sitting on a piece of diapers and playing with mud. Chen Beiqing frowned and was about to stand up when his shoulder was pressed by the man. The pressure exerted on him forced him to kneel on one knee and couldn't get up. But Chen Beiqing could feel that Li Nanheng must have known Coach Ling longer than him. But even so, Chen Beiqing had no intention of admitting defeat or giving way. Even though he was pressed to the ground by his shoulder, and sweat was dripping down his forehead, he still sneered. You were chasing her when I was still wearing a diaper. It seems that you haven't won her heart for a long time. You are really a senior. You must have more experience of failure than a newbie like me. Senior Li, please remind me what she hates most about you. The pressure on his shoulder increased again, making Chen Beiqing suspect that his shoulder would be crushed by the man in the next moment. You're courting death, Li Nanheng. At this time, the door of the classroom was opened and Feng Ling walked in. Seeing this scene, she was not surprised at all. She looked at Chen Beiqing, who was still unwilling to admit defeat, even though he was pressed to the ground, and then turned her eyes to the other man. What are you doing? Li Nanheng expressionlessly moved his hand away from Chen Beiqing's body, clapped his hands casually, and glanced at her with a faint smile. Nothing. He was trying to cover it up, but his attitude was so perfunctory. It was clear that he didn't like Chen Beiqing. Feng Ling didn't bother to meddle in their business these days. These two people were crazy. They fought with each other in the open and in the dark every day. She really didn't want to interfere. Anyway, both of them were big trouble. If one of them died, there would be one less. Perhaps only when both of them were crippled would her world be peaceful. The coach wants to talk to you. Come out for a while, Feng Ling said and turned to leave. Seeing that Feng Ling didn't even bother to look at them, Li Nanheng shook off the man on the ground. Chen Beiqing half knelt on the ground and also looked at the man who had turned to leave. Then the two of them looked at each other indifferently, and then looked away coldly and silently. When Li Nanheng also went out, Chen Beiqing got up from the ground, picked up a bottle of mineral water, and poured it on his head. After sobering up, he raised a towel and wiped his face with it. Then he looked outside, with one hand on his waist, gasped violently in the classroom, and slowly calmed his breath while pacing back and forth. He needed to think of a countermeasure, but after thinking for a long time, he found that he really didn't even know who Li Nanheng was. It seemed that it was not easy to compete fairly. In the office, when the coach saw Feng Ling, he came over with a smile and was about to talk to her, when he suddenly caught a glimpse of Li Nanheng who came in. The smile on his face instantly disappeared, and he looked up at the man in front of the door. The boss is not here these 2 days. Leave the things here to me for the time being. Recently, there have been a lot of people applying to be coaches in the martial arts club. Mr. Li, you don't have a good reason to come here. I don't know how good your martial arts skills are. It doesn't seem right for you to stand here and occupy other people's positions, just because you know some fancy martial arts. Why don't we find a time to have a match? Li Nanheng's eyes were indifferent, and he even seemed to want to laugh. You want to have a match with me? Since you say it so bluntly, I don't have to be too tactful. The coach snorted. Let's find a chance to have a match, okay? Li Nanheng put one hand in his trouser pocket and said indifferently, You decide the time. Seeing his fearless look, the coach looked at his height and the well-proportioned muscles on his arms. He couldn't see it through his clothes, but he could feel that Li Nanheng's martial arts skills were not bad. In recent days, the male students in Feng Ling's class had also complained that the new assistant coach was very good at martial arts, but he was stricter than Coach Ling. When he was really harsh, a group of people would complain incessantly. Coach Li personally supervised the movements and wouldn't stop until everyone was in a state of pain that was worse than death. At this time, the coach suddenly smiled and walked up to him. Your clothes fit you very well. I just don't know when you really practice. As he said this, he reached out to hold Li Nanheng's wrist through his sleeves. However, before he could exert any strength, Li Nanheng suddenly avoided the force between his fingers. At the same time, he suddenly grabbed his wrist. Even though it seemed that Li Nanheng only grabbed his wrist back, in fact, a sharp pain came from his wrist. At the same time, the head coach looked at him again and saw the obvious warning in Li Nanheng's eyes. The head coach did not speak. He only looked at Li Nanheng's hand that was able to dodge his hand so quickly and without leaving a trace, and even easily catch him. Although it was just a small handshake, it was obvious that this Li Nanheng was not simple. His martial arts skills and reaction speed were much better than he had imagined. Although he was a head coach here, in terms of martial arts skills, he was probably much weaker than him. Just like this, the two of them held hands with very calm smiles on their faces, but they had already secretly competed with each other. When the head coach pulled his hand out of his palm and quietly put his pale, bloodless hand behind his back, Li Nanheng looked at him calmly. Head coach, do you have something to say? The head coach didn't speak for a while and just looked at Li Nanheng. The two men looked at each other in silence. Although it was not as fierce as when Chen Beiqing was around, this silent confrontation made Feng Ling feel an inexplicable chill on her back. The two of them wouldn't really fight because of her, would they? Because of her? It shouldn't be. Just when Feng Ling felt that she was thinking too much, and that it was impossible for them to fight, the pain in the head coach's hand had recovered a lot. He casually put his hand by his side, and didn't touch Li Nanheng again. He just said, Tonight, the stadium of the opposite Polytechnic University is open to the public every week. Why don't we go there to have a friendly match? It won't involve any interests. How about it? Feng Ling. Li Nanheng smiled coldly. Up to you. I'll accompany you. Feng Ling. Chapter 1032. In the evening, while Li Nanheng was still supervising the movements of the students, Feng Ling walked out of the classroom and went straight to the head coach. Head coach, don't go to the stadium at night, Feng Ling said. The head coach's class today had already ended. He had changed his clothes and was waiting for them to go to the stadium together. Hearing her words, he looked up at her. Why? Are you afraid that I can't beat him? No, I just don't think there's a need to fight. It's meaningless. Do you understand what I mean? The head coach stood by the table and watched her for a while before saying, You mean that no matter whether I can beat him or not, you won't have any feelings for me, just like how you treated Chen Beiqing. Just because we are colleagues, you have been very polite to me. But if I accidentally expose my feelings for you and fight with Li Nanheng, will you be very upset that you are involved in such a matter? Feng Ling. Since you know that, why do you still fight? The head coach smiled. Ling, you don't understand a man's mentality. If I lose, I lose. If I win, I win. No matter what, it's fine. But since I like the same person, I should solve it in a man's way. Even if I know I can't beat him, at least I tried. Feng Ling really couldn't understand. Also, the head coach raised his eyebrows. Many of your martial arts skills seem to be similar to his. Although Li Nanheng has only been helping you teach those students recently, and hasn't fought much, I can tell from some clues in his movements and fighting habits. Did he teach you all your skills? Only someone who had a good foundation in martial arts and could carefully study and see through other people's martial arts skills could see all this from such small clues. Although the head coach might not be able to beat Li Nanheng, after all, he had been in this industry for so many years. He could remember any random movement of others. So although he didn't say anything about Li Nanheng being taken in these days, it was clear that nothing could be hidden from his eyes. I have a friend who works in the Los Angeles Police Department. He told me about 11 Base. That day, I felt that I had seen Li Nanheng's name somewhere before, so I searched it with the search terms in Los Angeles. Although I couldn't find much information about the Li family on the internet, and most of the information about 11 Base was confidential, I still saw Li Nanheng's name in the legal database of 11 Base. The head coach stared at Feng Ling's calm face as he spoke. If he is the person in charge of 11 Base, then who are you? Previously, I always saw that your skills were not bad, and you were so young, so I was very curious about what kind of experience you had. Now I can't help but wonder, are you a member of 11 Base? Yes. In the face of such conclusive evidence, Feng Ling really had nothing to hide. After all, even if she lied and said no, he knew she was lying. Therefore, it was better to be calm. 11 Base actually accepts women? If 11 Base was willing to accept women, I wouldn't have come to Boston right now. Feng Ling didn't explain too much. After saying this, she thought for a moment and said, "Those are all in the past. I don't want to mention it again, but since you've guessed his identity, don't fight." The head coach only smiled, glanced at the classroom not far away, and then looked at the time on his wrist. "I'll wait for him." Feng Ling frowned. "You still want to fight? Why not?" The head coach raised his brows. Feng Ling. At night. In the gymnasium of the Polytechnic University. In Feng Ling's eyes, the fight between the two men was too childish and strange. She really couldn't figure it out. Both of them were grown men in their 20s. Li Nanheng usually disdained to fight with others, and the head coach was usually the steady type. But they actually hit it off and ran over to fight as soon as they said they were going to fight. She couldn't be bothered to go to the stadium and directly drove home. After entering the house, she directly locked the door, too lazy to pay attention to the two lunatics. In the stadium, the two men didn't fight for long. The head coach knew he couldn't win and kept defending. Li Nanheng could also see that the other party was also testing him, so his attacks were very perfunctory. In the end, after spending more than an hour, there was no result. The two tall and long-legged men finally couldn't be bothered to fight anymore. They both lay on the ground of the stadium panting. They didn't continue fighting, nor did they speak. They just lay there, watching the lights above the stadium. "It's really my honor to be able to compete with the boss of 11 Base here." The head coach looked at the lights above and said while panting, "I thought you wanted to directly come here to cripple me. I didn't expect you to be letting me win." Li Nanheng also only panted a few times. He lay there and snorted disapprovingly. "You really know quite a lot. I also just learned that you are the boss of 11 Base." At first, I was indeed shocked, but thinking about Ah Ling's skills, I was already amazed. Your appearance and your identity as the boss of 11 Base only made me finally understand where she learned her skills from. As expected of the famous 11 Base, even a little girl can learn such good skills. If I wanted to go because of the fame, I wonder if they would still accept me at my age? The head coach said while smiling. Li Nanheng didn't answer, but just looked at the lights above indifferently. There was a moment of silence. Finally, the head coach stood up, sat on the spot, and looked at the empty stadium, saying, "Although I don't know why Ah Ling left your 11 Base, in my impression, when she first came to our martial arts club a year and a half ago, she was so quiet that many of us wondered if she had a personality defect. Later, we found that although the way she taught the students in class was strict and indifferent, she was very meticulous and taught well. Over time, we confirmed that she just didn't like to communicate with others and never liked to talk nonsense. Moreover, she was very defensive and wouldn't get too close to anyone. At that time, except during class time, she was always alone. When we went to talk to her, she just looked at us silently and didn't have the slightest intention to integrate with others. She was like a loner. I began to notice her from then on. I really have never seen a girl with such a personality. The head coach smiled and said, inexplicably, I feel that under her silence, there must be injuries and thorns all over her body. Otherwise, she wouldn't have such a thick armor and wouldn't refuse everyone's approach. I have always been wondering what kind of experience she had. Chapter 1033. Li Nanheng did not speak. The head coach continued. After that, I asked her several times about her past, but she refused to say anything. She only said that it was not a good memory. In fact, I was more curious about where she learned to be so skilled. She was so young, but she didn't say anything. Even her name was Aling. This Aling is a mystery to all of us. But because she is really good at martial arts, the boss cherishes talent very much. Even though she is mysterious, he still kept her until now. Every time there's a festival, whether it's a Western festival or the Chinese New Year, which is very important to the Chinese, I find that she's always alone. She never celebrates a festival, and she never mentions her birthday. She goes to work and gets off work on time every day, and she still doesn't communicate with others. Now that we've known each other for a while, she occasionally talks to me, but it's all about work. She still doesn't talk about anything outside of work. If it weren't for you, Mr. Li, I would never have thought that this young girl used to be a member of 11 Base. Now that I know where she came from, I'm even more curious. Why did she leave 11 Base, and why did she treat you, who was her former boss, so coldly? All of her defenses and the hidden injuries all over her body. Just who was it that caused her to do all of this? You. Li Nanheng also sat up at this time. He silently looked at the front of the stadium and said indifferently, "Is the fight over? Can I go now?" The head coach turned to look at him and suddenly chuckled. "She is a mystery that we can't solve. Perhaps only you can understand. I wish you good luck." Li Nanheng did not speak and directly walked out. He sped all the way back to Feng Ling's residence. When he arrived outside, he looked at the tightly shut door. Without thinking, that woman had locked it from the inside again. Li Nanheng was about to turn to open the door next door, when his footsteps suddenly paused. There seemed to be some residual smell in the air. The smell was very faint, but it was very obvious. Out of the corner of his eye, the man saw a footprint on the ground left by the sole of a shoe, and then glanced at the open door of the safety passage escalator not far away. 10 minutes ago, Feng Ling was taking a shower in her room. After the shower, she heard someone knocking on the door. She was too lazy to pay attention to it. Hearing the person outside knocking persistently, she glanced at the light next door and thought that Li Nanheng had returned from the fight with the head coach. She didn't know whether he had won or lost. She guessed that if he won, he probably came to show off to her. If he lost, he probably came to vent his anger on her. Anyway, it was nothing good, so she was too lazy to open the door. However, she was annoyed by the knocking. She suspected that Li Nanheng was drunk. Otherwise, why would he knock so hard? She got up impatiently and walked out. She pulled the door open and said, "Li Nanheng, I'm warning you. In the future, don't." Before she finished speaking, she instinctively raised her guard when she saw the 3 strange men standing outside the door. At this time, no one else knew that she lived here. She thought it was Li Nanheng, so she walked out angrily and was unprepared. When she subconsciously wanted to close the door, the 3 people outside the door had quickly stepped forward and held her shoulders. When she struggled to fight back, another person directly pressed her against the door, picked up a slightly wet square cloth, and pressed it against her nose. The moment Feng Ling smelled the smell, she instinctively held her breath. However, because she took a breath, she was dazed for a moment. At this moment, the 3 men pressed her hands and feet, and then pressed the cloth between her nose and mouth. No matter how long Feng Ling had been trained to hold her breath, she still couldn't help but take another breath after more than 3 minutes. This second breath caused her to completely lose the strength to struggle. Earlier, she barely had the strength to raise her foot to kick them. At this moment, she fell down powerlessly. Seeing that she had lost the ability to resist, the 2 men behind her raised their hands and slammed the back of her neck. When the woman in front of them suddenly fell down softly, they looked at each other, carried her up, and slammed the door shut. In case they bumped into someone in the elevator, they opened the door of the escalator and quickly took her away. The night was beautiful. On a deserted road somewhere in Boston, a black car sped wildly. In the car, 3 men looked at the short-haired woman whose hands and feet were tied and lying motionless on the back seat. Is this the girlfriend that the Chin family's brat has been pining for? I'm not sure if she's his girlfriend, but he definitely likes her. I've observed for a long time. That brat orders flowers and sends them to her every day. Every day, he goes to that martial arts club just to catch a glimpse of her. In short, if we want the Chin family's brat and his father to hand over the thing, it's useless to find them. We might as well take this woman away. Based on that brat's feelings for her, he definitely won't sit back and do nothing. Was it this woman who stopped our men a year ago? Yes, it's her. This chick's skills are not bad. Otherwise, why would the 3 of us be sent to deal with her? On the road at night, the car sped forward. At the same time, a black Hummer suddenly appeared in the restless night. It chased closely behind the car, getting faster and faster. By the time the people in the car noticed that there seemed to be a car chasing behind them, the black Hummer had already rushed over at a crazy speed. The speed of their car was already very fast, but in the end, it couldn't outrun a model like the Hummer. They stepped hard on the accelerator, but were still overtaken by the Hummer in an instant. The moment after the Hummer overtook the car, the black Hummer suddenly stopped in the middle of the road with a decisive momentum. Just as the 2 cars were about to collide, the 3 people in the car screamed in horror and hurriedly stepped on the brakes. However, because the speed was too fast and the distance was too close, they couldn't stop the car too quickly. The whole car directly crashed into the black Hummer. The Hummer's body was very big. In front of this small car, it couldn't be easily shaken. With a bang, there was a violent impact. At the moment when the front of the car was dented, the Hummer's door only caved in a little. In an instant, the surrounding air was filled with the smell of gasoline leaking from the fuel tank and a faint smell of gunpowder. The 2 cars collided violently. When the 3 people saw that they couldn't stop, they hurriedly shrank back. They were almost unable to breathe because of the airbag. Chapter 1034. Feng Ling, who had been unconscious in the back seat, abruptly fell to the ground due to the impact. Her head hit the car door hard. She suddenly frowned and opened her eyes with some difficulty. Her vision darkened, but the smell around her and the situation around her allowed her to quickly figure out the situation in front of her in a severe coma and dizziness. Feng Ling tried to struggle, but found that she had no strength. Her hands and feet were also tied tightly. In the darkness of the car, she turned around and saw the airbag popping out, and the 3 people who struggled out of the airbag and cursed under their breath. Her impression of the 3 people returned to the moment when the door opened, and she immediately frowned. Fuck, where did this bastard come from? Did he rush out to block the road without a care for his life? One of the people who had just struggled out of the airbag cursed and reached out to grab a long steel rod under the back seat. He directly pushed open the deformed car door and rushed out. Feng Ling didn't move, and they didn't find that she had woken up. They each picked up whatever they could hit, endured the sharp pain from the impact, and all got out of the car. Feng Ling didn't know what had happened outside. She was suddenly woken up, and her entire body was in pain. However, if it weren't for the intense pain from the impact, she most likely wouldn't have woken up under the strong effects of the drug. Although she was awake, her body didn't have any strength at all. She secretly observed the surroundings and slowly moved her bound hands and feet, trying to break free. However, she found that the rope was very tight, and there was no space for her to move. The 3 people who got out of the car looked at the car that suddenly rushed over to block the road in front of them. The black Hummer was unaffected except for a slight dent in the door. Even the windows were still tightly closed, and there was no damage. In the dark night, the black Hummer was like the god of death from hell. It was motionless, but it seemed to be permeating with a coldness that sent chills down one's spine. Let's go see where this bastard came from. This car seems to be a modified Hummer. Even if this model is very sturdy, it's too sturdy. Is it a military car? Even if it's a military car, it has to call us Dad here. Let's go see. Go. The three of them were holding steel rods and various weapons that they had hidden in the car. They even had 2 guns on their waists. Seeing that the car was not moving, they approached it hesitantly. Just as the person walking in front suddenly gathered his courage and was about to pull the door open, the driver's seat door suddenly opened and even slammed outwards with great force, causing the person who had just walked to the door to feel a pain in his chest. He took a few steps back awkwardly and was supported by 2 people who rushed over from behind. The 3 of them raised their heads at the same time and saw a tall and straight man get out of the car. His gaze seemed to have no trace of warmth at all as he slammed the door with a bang. Then, he stood on the spot and glanced at the person in front of them with clear eyes. Who are you? Why are you blocking our way? This man didn't seem to be a simple character, but they had only done some shady business with the Chun family in Boston. They didn't remember provoking the man in front of them. Moreover, the Hummer didn't look like someone from an ordinary place could drive it. They instinctively felt that they had to be careful. Li Nanheng coldly looked at the deformed car in front of him, and his ink-black eyes were icy cold. Put my people down. The 3 people were startled, exchanged a few glances, and turned to him at the same time suspiciously. Your people? I have no interest in entangling with a group of small characters like you. Let my people go. I won't interfere with your disputes with other families. Li Nanheng expressionlessly walked in the direction of the car. Because of his movement, the 3 people tightened their grip on the steel rods in their hands and subconsciously took precautions. However, the man didn't even look at them. The car was leaking gasoline drop by drop and was likely to spontaneously combust. Feng Ling was still inside. Li Nanheng quickened his steps as if there was wind behind him. At the moment when one of them thought he was going to do something and suddenly raised his rod to rush toward him, Li Nanheng raised his arm and slapped him away without looking back. Then he raised his foot and kicked the other person away. At the same time, he quickly walked to the car door, pulled it opened the door and entered. Sure enough, Feng Ling was lying inside. The moment the car door opened, Feng Ling, who had been struggling to untie the rope, turned her eyes and met the man's eyes. Almost instantly, Feng Ling suddenly mouthed, "Be careful." Li Nanheng's gaze was still fixed on her. He didn't look back, but the moment the person behind swung the rod down, he accurately raised his hand to grab the other person's wrist, snatched the rod, and turned back to kick the person. At the same time, the steel rod that was thrown up rolled into his hand. Li Nanheng directly pressed the person who had fallen to the ground with the steel rod, and expressionlessly withdrew his gaze. He directly kicked the deformed car door down and strode into the car. As he bent down to help Feng Ling up, he directly untied the rope around her wrist. Feng Ling's entire body was weak. The moment the man helped her up, she felt the warmth of his hand. She didn't speak but just looked at him. Her eyes were slightly red from the drug, but at least she could see the man's face clearly. How did you know that something happened to me? Her voice was very low, and she couldn't muster much strength. Let's get out of here first. The man's voice was heavy. The moment he untied the rope around her wrist, he saw that the rope around her feet was even tighter. With an ugly expression, he was about to carry her out of the car. All of a sudden, another steel rod was swung down from the other side. Feng Ling was about to shout for him to be careful, but before she could, the man had already dodged with her in his arms. However, in order not to fall, he could only turn his back. The steel rod abruptly smashed down on the back of the man's neck. Even though Li Nanheng didn't make a sound, Feng Ling knew that the back of his neck was the most vulnerable part. When the man turned around with her in his arms, he staggered for a moment, but in the next instant, he held her firmly and did not let her fall. Feng Ling didn't have the slightest bit of strength to do anything. She could only watch as the man's face turned much paler in the dark night. However, he held her with one hand and pulled out the steel rod with the other, directly smashing it down on the head of the person by the car. Chapter 1035. Ah, mother asterisk cur. The person whose head was smashed cried out in pain. His face was covered in blood as he raised the stick in his hand and rushed forward. Feng Ling could barely keep her eyes open, but she tried her best to stay awake. She could only feel that everything in front of her was spinning. Even though Li Nanheng was only holding her with one arm, he was still very stable. While holding her and dodging, she could still feel his nimble footsteps as he fought back. Even if she was a big burden in his arms, he just carried a 90-kilogram sandbag in his arms like when he was training in the base. He made sure that the sandbag in his arms would not be hurt when he fought with others, that the sandbag would not leak, and that he and the sandbag in his arms would be intact. All of this was obviously quite simple for Li Nanheng, especially when the three opponents were just ordinary people. They only had steel rods and knives in their hands. Even if they had guns, they were obviously not good guns. Because of this, Feng Ling was not worried that the man would be injured because of her. However, after all, he had been hit by a steel rod on the back. She didn't know how his injury was. Although she felt that his movements were not slow, Feng Ling still looked at the man who had been holding her firmly in his arms and said softly, "Don't get hurt." Li Nanheng kicked back again, and vaguely heard the low warning in his arms. He took a moment to look down at her, only to see that Feng Ling leaned her head against his chest and closed her eyes from time to time because of the knockout powder. He smiled slightly and held the woman more firmly. He dodged the man who rushed over with a knife and slashed back with one hand, knocking the knife in the man's hand to the ground. He then picked up the steel rod in his hand and hit the man's shoulder, arm, and abdomen several times. In just 3 to 5 minutes, Feng Ling felt that Li Nanheng didn't need to retreat at all. The deformed car behind him was enough for him to support himself. He carried her and rolled over the car. He then placed Feng Ling, who was frowning because of the dizziness, on the ground. He got up and grabbed one of the men's wrist. In an instant, there was only the sound of bones cracking and the man's heart-wrenching scream. Then the man hit the man's abdomen hard with his elbow until he spat out blood from his mouth. The man threw him to the other two men in disgust. He fell to the ground, staggered, struggled, and then lay there without the strength to move again. His broken wrist trembled on the ground, and he groaned in great pain. When the other two saw this, they were about to pull out their guns, but they didn't expect that at the same time, the man in front of them, who was obviously at a disadvantage in a one-on-one fight, had already raised a gun and was pointing it at their heads. The two of them stared at the black muzzle in disbelief. Then, they glanced at their comrade who was twitching in pain on the ground. That gun! Did he snatch it from him when he was beating up their comrade? What a fast hand speed! Seeing that even the gun was in his hand, the two men looked back at the deformed car behind them, and then at the man on the ground. At the same time, because of their injuries, they hesitated and took 2 steps back. This group of people only had conflicts with the Chun family in Boston, and had nothing to do with 11 Base, or the people in Los Angeles. They didn't know who the man in front of them was, but instinctively felt that they shouldn't fight anymore. They should run. Otherwise, not only would they fail to complete the mission, but the 3 of them would also die here tonight. Li Nanheng looked coldly at the 2 men who had begun to retreat, and his men had begun to pull the trigger on the gun. The 2 men were so frightened that their legs turned to jelly, and they took a few steps back. They clenched the steel bars and knives in their hands, and hesitated whether to pull out their guns or run away, when Li Nanheng suddenly shot one of them in the wrist. As the man screamed and the steel bar in his hand fell to the ground with a clang, Li Nanheng's eyes were cold. Get out! Even if it was just a very light word, the 3 men who were injured to different degrees felt a chill in their hearts. The 2 men endured the great pain of their wounds, pulled up their companion on the ground, and then looked at the gun in Li Nanheng's hand in horror. There were still a few bullets in the gun. They knew very well that if this man wanted to kill them, none of them could escape. When the 3 men rolled and crawled along the road and limped away, Li Nanheng looked in their direction coldly, put down the gun, and looked back at Feng Ling, who was sitting against the deformed car with her eyes open and closed. Although Feng Ling couldn't stay awake, she could feel that she was basically out of danger now. She opened her eyes again, and saw that the man had come back. When he bent down, he carried her in his arms without saying a word. She leaned against his arms, pressed her head weakly against his shoulder, and closed her eyes. She wanted to speak, but couldn't muster the strength. The man expressionlessly carried her past the deformed car and walked back to the black Hummer, which only had a slightly damaged door. He carried her in, placed her in the passenger seat, and helped her fasten the seatbelt. Feng Ling sat there and opened her eyes to look at him. The man didn't speak. After fastening the seatbelt for her, he took off his coat and folded it into a long square to cushion the back of her neck. This way, when she could barely sit still, she could lean more comfortably. Perhaps he didn't expect that Li Nanheng, who had a rough personality, would be so meticulous in taking care of others. Feng Ling glanced at him, and the man had already closed the car door. It wasn't until the man walked around the car and sat in the driver's seat that Feng Ling turned to look at him. But from this angle, she could only see the man's firm chin and his cold, slightly pale face. Although the paleness was not very obvious, it was impossible for him to not feel the blow on the back of his neck. After all, she was almost kidnapped. After all, she had just been saved by him. Right now, she couldn't say anything to save face or thank him. She just looked at him until the man started the engine and took her away from the road, away from the car that had been completely deformed. The tall black Hummer sped on the road. At this moment, Feng Ling's entire body had relaxed. She allowed the drug that had been keeping her awake to take effect again, and closed her eyes to fall asleep. I want to chat with more like-minded people about rebirth of a warm marriage, sweet wife new release, about life and looking for a confidant. Chapter 1036. When Feng Ling woke up again, she had already returned to her bed at home. Her head was still a little dizzy, but at least it was only the aftereffect of the drug, and she did not feel much pain. She sat up on the bed and looked around. Then, she lowered her head and saw that the clothes she was wearing had not changed. It was still the one she was wearing when she was knocked out and kidnapped. At that time, she had just taken a shower and changed into a loose and comfortable set of clothes. This was the one she was wearing. She got out of bed and walked out of the bedroom. Every room was empty, and there was no trace of Li Nanheng. If it weren't for the fact that she was still a little dizzy, and the smell of the drug still lingered in her nose, she would have thought that what happened before was just a nightmare and nothing had happened. However, it was not a dream. Feng Ling thought for a while, walked out, opened the door, and looked at the door next door. She saw that the door was closed, and she could not see any movement inside. She stood in front of the door for a long time, and then turned to look at the night outside the window. She must have slept not long after being sent back. The sky was still dark, and it was now 2:30 in the morning. If it weren't for the fact that Feng Ling was suddenly drugged, she might have been able to deal with this kind of sudden kidnapping. But after all, she was drugged. If it weren't for Li Nanheng's timely arrival, she didn't know where she would be now. But after all, when she was in 11 base, she had encountered situations several times more dangerous than tonight. This kind of small matter was obviously not worth mentioning to Li Nanheng, so it seemed that there was no need for her to thank him. Feng Ling silently took a step back, and was about to close the door when her hand paused. In her mind, the deformed car door was suddenly kicked open by the man, and the man rushed into the car to pick her up and turned to leave. Because he had to take care of her, he could only turn around, and was hit hard by the rod. Although that kind of steel rod wouldn't be life-threatening, as long as he was properly guarded, the rod had hit a very vulnerable and fatal place on the back of his neck. If Li Nanheng hadn't dodged in time, he might have been knocked unconscious by that blow. No matter what, the place that was hit wouldn't be a light injury. Feng Ling's hand paused on the doorknob for a moment. A moment later, she walked out, and was about to knock on the door next door when she suddenly heard the door behind her close automatically. Feng Ling. She looked back at the door of her house behind her. She seemed to have forgotten to bring her keys with her. Feng Ling stood alone in the corridor under the automatic sensor lights. After a moment of silence, she walked over and knocked on the door. After knocking a few times, it was still very quiet inside. Then she knocked again. About half a minute later, she heard footsteps coming from the other side of the door, until the door was opened. The man inside the door had already showered and changed his clothes. His hair was clean and fluffy, and he looked like he was ready to sleep. He only glanced at her outside the door. Without saying a word, he let go of the door and turned to walk in. Seeing that he intended to let her in, Fengling couldn't go home right now. After all, she didn't bring her keys. If she wanted to go back, she would probably have to ask Li Nanheng for his backup key. She walked in and stared at the man's back. She was not in the mood to observe the decoration and environment of his room. She didn't care whether this house was rented or bought by him. These were not the focus of her attention. Is the injury serious? She walked in and closed the door, then went straight to the point. Li Nanheng casually picked up a box of cigarettes on the coffee table, tilted his head, and lit it. He then looked back at her and asked as though nothing had happened. What injury? Fengling walked over and stood about a meter in front of the man. She looked at his face that was still slightly pale, even after taking a shower and resting for a while. Even through the white disguise he spat out to cover up everything, she could still see it clearly. Although I was drugged at the time, my mind was still clear. The blow you received wasn't light. Is that so? Li Nanheng narrowed his eyes and took another puff of his cigarette. He said disapprovingly, "There are no wounds or blood. It's a small injury. It's not worth mentioning." Fengling looked at him coldly. Do you think I'm a 3-year-old child again? If it's just a superficial wound that can see blood, it might be better. But this kind of blow from a steel rod is all below the skin. If it's the weak part behind the neck, it's very likely that you'll be crippled. Why can't I just dodge? Even if I fall down, I won't die. Have you ever thought that you might be killed by that blow? Li Nanheng glanced at her, his expression calm. Even if I die, I won't let you fall down. Fengling looked at him speechlessly. I won't be touched. And I know. The man took another puff of his cigarette. His expression was deep, as though he knew how heartless and unscrupulous she was. Fengling glanced at his home clothes and said softly, Take off your clothes. Let me take a look. Li Nanheng's brows moved slightly in the white disgust. And, you want me to take off my clothes? Fengling's gaze was impatient. She said coldly, Let me take a look at your injury. The man did not move. He just stood there quietly and curved his lips slightly. There's no need to look. I said it's a small injury. There's nothing to see. Li Nanheng, as a man, don't dawdle. I just want to take a look. I didn't say I would be responsible for your injury. You have to at least let me know. After all, it's the back of the neck. Fengling lost her patience and stepped forward to tug at his clothes. However, the moment the woman suddenly approached, Li Nanheng lowered his eyes to look at her. When she suddenly raised her hand to tug at his clothes, the man grabbed her hand and pressed it against his chest. Fengling faltered. She could feel the temperature of the man's body through a layer of clothes. It was clearly a normal body temperature, but for some reason, it was so hot that her entire hand and arm seemed to be burning. She rushed to pull her hand out, but the man pressed her hand heavily. He held her with one hand and put the other in his trouser pocket. With half a cigarette in his mouth, he narrowed his eyes and looked at her through the smoke. He looked extremely roguish. Then all the more you can't look. If you say you want to be responsible for me, I'll take off my clothes for you to see now. Since you said you won't be responsible, why should I take off my clothes? Do you think I like to take off my clothes in front of women? Li Nanheng seemed to be smiling as he spoke with the cigarette in his mouth. Chapter 1037. Li Nanheng sneered. He took the cigarette out of his lips and put it out in the ashtray beside him. At the same time he said, You weren't a woman in front of me at that time. 1 second to remember. There's no pop-up window for free reading. Fengling. There's no difference between now and the past. You can treat me as a man. There's a difference. Perhaps the man was still affected by the injury on his neck, or perhaps he hadn't rested well, or perhaps because he had just smoked. His voice was low and hoarse. Fengling couldn't be bothered to argue with him, nor could she be bothered to ask him what the difference was. The man said hoarsely, right now you're a woman and the woman I like. The sudden confession might be a fatal blow, but Feng Ling said expressionlessly, as a married man, aren't you ashamed to say such words? Li Nanheng raised his brows. How many times do I have to say it? I'm not married anyone. From the beginning to the end, there's only you. Can't you believe me? Feng Ling remained expressionless. I'm not interested in your matters. Right now, I just want to see your injury. Don't talk to me about useless things. Li Nanheng immediately smiled. His handsome face was slightly pale, but his smile actually looked a little harmless. I just saved you. I didn't ask you to repay me with your body. Can't you say something nice? Feng Ling remained expressionless. You personally killed the enemy and saved many members of 11 base. Does everyone have to repay you with their bodies? Li Nanheng choked. For the first time in his life, he found that Feng Ling, this adorable and stupid little wolf girl, who came out of the jungle, could have such a sharp tongue. There were even times when he couldn't refute her for a while. The man suddenly turned his head away and sighed. He looked at her and said, I don't need you to do anything. At least give me a smile, okay? Aren't you tired of talking with a stiff face? There's nothing funny if I can't smile. Feng Ling didn't want to talk nonsense with him. While he was about to turn to sit on the sofa, she suddenly reached out and pulled a large piece of his shirt down. In an instant, the bruise on the back of the man's neck extended from his neck to more than half of the wound on his back. Li Nanheng paused because of her movement. He glanced sideways at her stiffly standing behind him. After making sure that she had seen what she wanted to see, he tugged his clothes up and turned back to look at her. I said it's just a small injury, but you insist on seeing it. Do you want to make yourself uncomfortable? Feng Ling did not speak. She turned back to look at the things in his room, and then saw the phone by the side. Dr. Wen and Dr. Qin are not in Boston. Should I call a doctor over to take a look at you, or go directly to the hospital? How serious are the injuries? You still need to see a doctor? At least the blood clot is serious. The back of the neck is not an ordinary place. If the blood clot is serious, there may be other effects. If it did, I would have called the doctor. Li Nanheng said calmly. I'm still young and haven't married the woman I like. I don't want to die so early. If there's a problem, I'll solve it myself. There's no need to wait for you to wake up. Don't worry, in. Feng Ling ignored the vague meaning in his words. She looked around the place where he lived and said, Do you have a medicine box here? No. Then I'll go buy some medicine and apply some medicine for you. With that, she turned to go out but suddenly paused. She remembered that she didn't bring her keys, phone, or money. She didn't even wear a coat. How could she go out in the middle of the night? She stood stiffly for a moment, but was too embarrassed to say that she forgot to bring her keys. She fell into a dilemma. Li Nanheng didn't stop her. After all, she specially came here in the middle of the night. If she didn't help him apply some medicine, she would feel guilty and couldn't sleep well. However, seeing that she suddenly paused, the man watched for a moment and raised his handsome brows. You forgot to bring your keys? Feng Ling. After a moment of silence, she suddenly heard a chuckle from the man's chest. Feng Ling instantly furrowed her brows and abruptly turned around. However, she didn't know when the man had approached. Her face abruptly brushed against the man's chest. She was unable to stand properly and stumbled backward. The man reached out to hold her and pressed her firmly into his embrace. However, the moment Feng Ling was abruptly pulled into the man's arms, she breathed in the scent of his freshly showered body and abruptly pushed him away. She took 2 steps back to maintain the proper distance and said with an ugly expression, Give me the key, you made a backup. Li Nanheng looked at his empty arms and then at Feng Ling, who had quickly moved away. He sighed and put down his hand. When I sent you back to your room to rest, I left the key on the coffee table in your room. I don't have any backup keys here. Do you think I'll believe you? Feng Ling coldly glanced at him. Didn't you say you copied 10 keys? Li Nanheng sneered. You believe such nonsense. Why don't you believe me when I say something else? What other words? For example, I didn't marry any other woman. Feng Ling directly looked away from his face. It's not about whether I believe it or not. It has nothing to do with me. With that, she walked out. It doesn't matter if you don't have the key. There are some simple blood circulation and wound medicine in the convenience store downstairs. I often buy things there and know them. It's not a big deal for me to go on credit. It was not much money to buy medicine. She would rather go to someone else to buy it on credit with a smile than to say a word to him. Even if she wanted to use his wallet for a while, she would not say a word. Li Nanheng looked at her back. When Feng Ling had already walked to the door, he said, "The wallet next to the clothes rack at the door. Take it yourself." Feng Ling walked to the door and glanced at the place he said. Sure enough, she saw a black wallet. She hesitated for a second, picked it up, took out 2 bills from it and walked out. Although it was cold outside, she only took the elevator down and asked the security guard to go to the convenience store opposite to buy some medicine. She didn't need to go out, so the medicine was bought smoothly. Feng Ling returned with the medicine and saw that Li Nanheng's door was not closed. She looked at her closed door again. She didn't know if he had the key. If he didn't, would she have to stay with him for the whole night? And tomorrow was the weekend. Chapter 1038. The corridor outside the door was still a little cold. After standing for a while, Feng Ling felt a little cold. She had no choice but to pass by her closed door and walk to the half-open door next door. She actually went downstairs to ask the security guard to buy medicine for her. It took her no more than 20 minutes, but it was clear that Li Nanheng was really sleepy. He sat on the sofa to wait for her, but when she entered the door, she saw that the man had fallen asleep on the sofa. Although he was asleep, the man was still leaning against the sofa. His face was slightly paler than usual, but there was no change in his expression. It was as though the wound on the back of his neck was not a serious injury, and he didn't take it seriously at all. However, Feng Ling had learned the structure of many parts of the human body in 11 base, and knew the most vulnerable parts of the human body. The back of the neck was very fatal. Even if he didn't die, he would definitely faint. Even if he didn't faint, he would definitely be affected to a certain extent. She couldn't just ignore it, and had to check it carefully. She wanted to take the opportunity to help him apply medicine, to see if the injury was serious. But he actually fell asleep just like that. She walked in and placed the medicine on the coffee table. She stood by the sofa. Although she didn't want to look, there seemed to be nothing related to her in this room. She stood by the side, and her eyes finally fell on the man. After watching for a while, Feng Ling walked over, took the neatly folded thin blanket by the sofa, gently shook it, and then covered him with it. The man didn't open his eyes, but when the thin blanket covered him, his brows moved almost imperceptibly. Seeing that he didn't wake up, Feng Ling hesitated for a moment before picking up the medicine. She squeezed some ointment onto her hand, and then turned to look at the man who had been sleeping. She carefully tugged open the collar of his home clothes, and carefully smeared the ointment onto the back of his neck bit by bit. His head was slightly tilted while he was sleeping, and she carefully smeared the ointment onto the back of his neck. However, in this position, she could only apply the ointment to the small area behind his neck, and couldn't apply it to the other parts of his back. Feng Ling gently pushed the man's body, but didn't want to wake him up. After looking down at him for a while, she suddenly got up from the sofa with a cold expression, and took a step back. "If you're awake, turn around. I'll apply medicine for you." Li Nanheng opened his eyes and looked at this observant girl. In the end, he did not say a word, and only turned his head slightly to cooperate with her. Seeing that he actually cooperated, the words that Feng Ling had prepared to scold him choked back in her throat. But he was pretending to be asleep. How could he pretend to be asleep when he knew she was applying medicine for him? Crazy, Feng Ling complained in her heart, but didn't show it on her face. She took the ointment with an ugly expression, and was about to tear his clothes open a little more. However, the man sitting on the sofa suddenly untied the collar of his clothes, and casually took off his shirt. "Ah!" Feng Ling's eyes lit up, and then she said, "Ah!" Feng Ling watched as the man suddenly leaned lazily against the sofa, revealing his perfect upper body. Her hand that was holding the ointment inexplicably trembled. Her gaze landed on the man's abdominal muscles and chest muscles, then moved up his arms, and finally landed on his back. The wound that was clearly caused by the steel rod immediately attracted her full attention. She had clearly seen him take off his clothes before. She also admitted that when he didn't treat her as a woman, he often walked in front of her with his upper body bare. It wasn't like she hadn't seen it before. Why did she feel a little awkward now? She leaned over and bent down to check the wound on his back. As she smeared the ointment on his back with her fingers, she forcefully poked back and forth at all the vulnerable acupoints near his wound. Feeling the care and probing under her movements, Li Nanheng leaned against the sofa and closed his eyes to enjoy the coolness of the ointment and the strength of her soft hands stroking his back. He then felt the pain under her fingers and smiled lightly. "Don't poke me. I said it didn't hurt your vital parts. Whether it was many years ago, now or in the future, you have to remember to believe every word I say." Feng Ling did not speak. After confirming that he was really fine, and that it was really just subcutaneous tissue damage and blood clots, she was relieved and applied the ointment on his wound. "Lean your shoulder a little more to the left. I can't apply it here," Feng Ling said with her head lowered. The man cooperatively moved his shoulder to the side. When she was finally done, Feng Ling twisted the lid of the ointment and was about to turn to wipe the remaining ointment on her fingers. However, when she turned to leave from the sofa, the man who had been obediently leaning against the sofa reached back and abruptly held her wrist. Feng Ling paused and turned back to look at him. At this moment, the man also turned back. As the ointment on his back had yet to dry, he could not lean against the sofa for the time being. So he sat, held her wrist, and looked at her. Time passed second by second. Feng Ling's eyes did not waver. Because he was injured, she did not struggle and only said, "Let go." Of course, Li Nanheng did not let go. He only looked at her. "Stay here with me tonight." His words made her instantly think of the real problem. She did not bring the key. Feng Ling tugged her hand out of his palm, turned away from the sofa, threw the ointment back on the coffee table, and then took out a tissue to wipe the remaining ointment on her fingers. As she wiped it, she walked around the coffee table to the other side, still maintaining a suitable distance from him, and then threw the tissue into the wastebasket by the side, without replying. Li Nanheng sat on the sofa and did not move. Looking at her distant appearance, he said, "I really don't have another backup key here. It's not a suitable time to ask someone to open the lock for you at this time. I'll ask someone to open the lock tomorrow morning. For now, sleep here first. It's only a few hours before dawn. I won't sleep." Feng Ling glanced at the time. "If you want to sleep, go ahead. I'll just sit in the living room for a while." Li Nanheng looked at her motionlessly with his ink-like deep eyes. "I'll sit with you." "No need." Feng Ling looked at the man's pale face. "You're injured. You should rest." "I just slept, so I'm not sleepy now. Besides, I can't sleep well in an unfamiliar environment. Even if there's only a wall between us, this is not my place. Can you let me sit here for a while? I want to be alone." Chapter 1039. Li Nanheng didn't move and still sat there. "And then I'll stay here with you." Feng Ling glanced at him. "Didn't you hear the point?" "What?" "I said I want to be alone." Li Nanheng looked at her for a while, and then seemed a little embarrassed. He coughed and picked up the clothes on the sofa and slowly put them on. It seemed that his back was really hurting. When he put on the sleeves, he didn't take them off as quickly as before. After his arm froze for a while, seeing that Feng Ling had no intention of helping him put on his clothes, he finally put them on by himself. "You can cover the thin blanket on the sofa. If it's not warm enough, there is a bed and a quilt in the next room." Li Nanheng stood up. After all, he knew that Feng Ling had no patience for him now. It was useless for him to adopt the previous aggressive method. He could only take it slow and not rush at all. Feng Ling didn't reply. After he stood up, she picked up the thin blanket on the sofa, folded it, and put it aside, as if she wouldn't cover what he had covered. Li Nanheng felt a breath stuck in his chest. He looked at her, and raised his hand to move his arm gently. After pulling the wound on his back, His face turned pale again. Fengling glanced at him. Why aren't you resting? Why are you walking around me? If you mind me being here, I'll go out now. It doesn't matter if I stand in the corridor for a few hours. Even if he wanted to stay a little longer, he couldn't. Li Nanheng looked at her sullenly. He wanted to speak, but Fengling looked away and didn't look at him anymore. Damn it! Li Nanheng had never met such a difficult person in his life. And she was even a woman. Rest early. After the man finished speaking, he no longer waved his arm in front of her, and turned to return to the bedroom. The living room returned to silence. The man's strong, clear, and unique scent finally left. Fengling finally felt that she could breathe deeply. After sitting on the sofa for a while, she lay down on the sofa. Although the surrounding environment and the living room looked unfamiliar, she didn't seem to be particularly uncomfortable. The drug had not completely dissipated, and in fact her head was still hurting. She lay there for a while, looking at the simple and clean living room, and then at the snow-white walls. In her mind, she was suddenly woken up by the car and rolled out of the back seat. When she woke up, she saw Li Nanheng pull open the deformed car door and jump in. No matter how long he closed his eyes, he couldn't erase that scene from his mind. In the end, Fengling turned over on the sofa and forced her head into the corner of the sofa. The next morning, Fengling didn't know how long she had slept. In short, she couldn't sleep at first. Later, she fell asleep in a daze, but she still had a lot of dreams. It had been a long time since he had had so many dreams. It wasn't until daybreak that he finally managed to sleep soundly. There seemed to be a faint smell of food in the air. It was very light and a little strange. It was really strange. Because of this smell, she had to open her eyes. When she saw that it was daybreak, she followed the direction of the smell to the kitchen door. From this angle, she could only see a corner of the man's back. Fengling looked in that direction in confusion. She got up and walked over. When she arrived at the kitchen door, she saw that a patient who had been hit by a stick yesterday was standing in the kitchen. He broke 2 eggs and put them on a plate. Then he used chopsticks and stirred the eggs awkwardly. When she saw the man turn on the rice cooker by the side, she saw that there was porridge inside. However, the porridge seemed to have less water. It was very dry, as though he had accidentally added too much water to cook rice. When she saw the man pour the eggs into the frying pan, Fengling couldn't stand it anymore. She walked over. What are you doing? The man flipped the egg pancake in the pot with his chopsticks and glanced at her. Why don't you sleep a little longer? Fengling looked at the miserable egg pancake in the pot. The smell is a little strange. Get up to take a look. The smell is strange? Fengling glanced at the thing in his pot. What else is there besides oil? I put some honey in it. Don't all girls like sweet food? I created a honey-fried egg pancake. Fengling. In the past, she knew that young Master Li was good at everything except cooking. When she lived in his apartment, she had eaten the food he cooked personally several times. How should she put it? It was cooked and wouldn't hurt her stomach, but the taste was very terrible. It was so terrible that except for someone like her who grew up in a wolf pack, it should be difficult for others to swallow. But she didn't expect that after more than 2 years, he didn't grow at all. Are you going to make breakfast? Fengling asked. Li Nanheng gave her a "do I look like I'm making dinner?" expression. Fengling pursed her lips, and suddenly reached out to take the frying pan from his hand. Move aside. Don't block me. Seeing that Fengling seemed to want to show off her skills in the kitchen, Li Nanheng very consciously moved aside. She then washed the pot and placed it on the stove again. She poured some water in, and then cracked 2 eggs in. A minute or 2 later, 2 perfect poached eggs were placed on the plate by the side. She looked at Fengling, and saw that Fengling had skillfully poured out the eggs in the pot that could no longer be eaten. She then scrubbed the pot, and placed it on the stove again. Looking at the 2 golden poached eggs, Li Nanheng looked at Fengling's hand, and then watched her skillfully add water in the rice cooker to boil the rice again. Your cooking skills were very ordinary before. Where did you learn to cook? Fengling continued to busy herself, and did not look back at him. She replied coldly, I'm not a young master like you. Even if you leave the base, There will be people who will find ways to come to your door every day to take care of your daily life. I can't eat takeout every day. 2 years is enough for me to learn how to cook. Is it strange? Li Nanheng saw that she was indeed more skilled than when she cooked 2 years ago. Standing by the side, watching her movements, the corners of his mouth inadvertently curved up. Feng Ling really couldn't stand his cooking skills. The food clearly didn't taste good, and he was injured. What on earth was he doing in the kitchen early in the morning? She didn't say that she would have breakfast here. Would she eat it even if he cooked it? And it tasted so bad. She tidied up the things in the kitchen, prepared the other ingredients, and prepared a few good dishes for breakfast. She was about to take the plates to the dining table outside, when she suddenly saw that the man had been watching her by the side. Feng Ling suddenly paused and raised her eyes to see that the man was looking at her, as though he was looking at a little wife. Chapter 1040. Only then did Feng Ling realize what she was doing. She was making breakfast in his kitchen. She even made 2 servings. She abruptly put down the plate in her hand, turned and walked out. Li Nanheng looked at her suddenly changed expression and raised his eyebrows. What's wrong? If you want to eat, eat by yourself. I'm not hungry. It's almost time. I'll call a locksmith over to help me unlock the door. With that, she walked out. Go after breakfast. I'm not eating. Li Nanheng did not speak, but his hand had already clasped her shoulder and pulled her back from the kitchen door. When Feng Ling turned to look at him impatiently, because of his movements and strength, the man only said, There's no hurry to leave after breakfast. I'll call someone over to unlock the door. You don't have to go downstairs to find the security guard. Feng Ling glanced at the phone he placed not far away. When she left the room last night, she did not bring her phone with her. If she went to find the security guard now, she didn't know how efficient they would be. Would they be able to find a reliable locksmith? She glanced at the time. It's time to find someone. Go sit down at the dining table. I'll make the call, Li Nanheng said as he patted her back. Don't worry, go eat breakfast. How can you not eat the breakfast you made yourself? You made so much. How can I finish it alone? I don't remember you being the kind of person who likes to waste food. What? Have you been living too freely in the past 2 years? Have you become so arrogant that you'll waste the breakfast you made? Feng Ling did not understand his words for a moment. When she came back to herself, the man had already pressed her to the dining table. She looked at the breakfast that the man brought up on the table. The breakfast that she had personally cooked. She was silent for a moment, picked up the cutlery, picked up a golden, perfectly fried egg, and put it into the plate in front of her. She took a bite. Li Nanheng picked up his cell phone to make a call, and came back less than 3 minutes later. He pulled out the chair opposite the dining table and sat down. As he picked up the tableware, he said indifferently, I've already contacted someone. They'll be here in half an hour. Eat in peace. She didn't expect that she had unknowingly made so much. Although she had finally learned how to cook in the past 2 years, she actually made very little. She really didn't expect that someone like her who hated the kitchen would one day use such a calm and patient attitude to make breakfast. And it was very sumptuous and complicated. What was she thinking? The breakfast was indeed delicious. But no matter how Li Nanheng praised it, Feng Ling sat there pretending not to hear him. She did not raise her head or look at him. A few minutes after breakfast, the locksmith arrived. Hearing that the person had arrived, Feng Ling immediately got up and walked out as if she was liberated. She opened the door and went out without looking back. The locksmith that Li Nanheng hired for her was a locksmith company that had a cooperative relationship with the police station in Boston. They were very fast and efficient. After asking the reason why the door was locked and confirming that her cell phone and information were in the room, they opened the door in less than a few minutes, and the lock on the door was still intact. Feng Ling wanted to pay before they left, but they were so scared that they quickly waved their hands and said, We can't accept this money. Although locksmithing is paid work, Mr. Li specially called the police station today, and the leader of the police station specially sent us here. It can be seen that your identity must be very unusual. We don't dare to accept money from Mr. Li's friend. It's just to open the lock. Seeing that they really refused to accept it, Feng Ling didn't force them. She chatted with them for a while and sent them away. When all those people were gone, she suddenly caught a glimpse of the door next door that had been closed at this time. In fact, they didn't spend much time together last night. At least when he listened to her and went to the bedroom to rest, she had been on the sofa. At least when she woke up, he was in the kitchen. Nothing happened, let alone flirting. They didn't even have a slightly warm conversation. Anyway, his injuries weren't too serious. Forget it. She had already applied the medicine for him. She had already thanked him. There was nothing to say. Feng Ling closed the door. Today happened to be the weekend, and there were classes after 2 o'clock on the weekend. The first few hours were her vacation time. Feng Ling wanted to make up for her sleep in the morning, but she couldn't fall asleep, so she simply balanced on the carpet in the living room for 2 minutes. When her flesh and bones seemed to be exhausted, she lay on the ground weakly, letting the sweat drip down from her forehead. After resting like this for a long time, she stood up from the ground, picked up a towel, and went straight into the bathroom. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Feng Ling changed into the clothes she often wore when she went to the martial arts club. She didn't go to call Li Nanheng. After all, he was injured and this injury was caused by her. If he didn't come when the class was about to begin, she could help him ask the boss for a leave. While thinking, Feng Ling stood in the elevator and looked up at the slowly descending number of the elevator. When the elevator reached the first floor, when she was about to go out, a man and a woman suddenly came in. They looked about 30 years old. Feng Ling didn't look back at them. After walking out of the elevator, she was about to leave in her flat sneakers, quiet and harmless, as if she were a completely different person from the excellent Feng Ling, who used to be in the sniper team of 11 base. When the two people walked into the elevator, they just casually glanced at her, and then stood at the back of the elevator. One of the men pressed the elevator button. The wall of the elevator was a mirror. Feng Ling felt something was wrong, but she couldn't tell what was wrong. She subconsciously turned back, and suddenly saw the red number on the elevator reflected on the mirror wall, before the elevator door closed. Why was it on the floor where she and Li Nanheng lived? This apartment was a 2-unit structure, and there were only 2 families on each floor. The 2 people looked very unfamiliar and had Chinese skin, but their eyes seemed a little fierce. Although it was not obvious, Feng Ling could sense what was hidden in a person's heart. These 2 people were very dangerous. The moment Feng Ling's footsteps suddenly stopped outside the elevator door, she abruptly turned back. In the last gap before the elevator door closed, she saw the outline of a special gun handle under the 2 men's clothes. Chapter 1041. Feng Ling did. Others couldn't recognize the outline, but Feng Ling did. Her eyelids twitched violently. The 2 of them had guns, and their aim was precisely on that floor. But they obviously didn't know her. So who were they after? The answer was obvious. Seeing that the elevator door had closed, Feng Ling's footsteps paused. Then she abruptly walked to the safety passage not far away, and rushed up the escalator. Relying on the physical strength that she had trained for many years, she ran to the 14th floor in one breath, and jumped out of the window on the 14th floor. In modern buildings, especially in the United States, high-rise buildings would have an external fire escape on the 14th floor, which was equivalent to a long public balcony. Feng Ling hid on the 14th floor along this fire escape, and looked up. She and Li Nanheng lived on the 15th floor, which was only 2 or 3 meters away from the window of Li Nanheng's room. In the room, Li Nanheng's back had been hurting all night, so he raised his arm and moved it twice. Although it was not a big problem, the hit on the back of his neck was enough to make him not dare to move too much. He had to rest for at least a few days, and he couldn't do any strenuous exercise in the next few days. Suddenly his cell phone rang. The man picked up the cell phone, saw the caller ID, frowned and picked it up. "Boss, the remaining members of the drug gangs that we encircled in Los Angeles 3 months ago have appeared again. They have contacted their accomplices all over the country and are lurking everywhere. They can't enter 11 base, but they are likely to find your trace. Boss, you must be careful. Where are you now? We'll send someone to protect you right away. On the phone, as soon as the voice of a member of 11 base fell, there was a knock on the door. At this time, Feng Ling had already left, and if there was no reason, she would never come knocking on his door. Hearing the knock on the door, Li Nanheng said indifferently to the phone by his ear, "They have come. It's too late." With that, he hung up the phone, turned around, picked up the sports coat on the sofa, and put it on, covering the wound on his back and the back of his neck. At the same time, he took out a silencer gun from under the sofa cushion and threw it into his trouser pocket. He walked directly to the door and leaned against it, listening to the sounds of knocking on the door and the movements outside. The knocking lasted for about 2 minutes, and it suddenly became quiet outside. Li Nanheng put one hand in his trouser pocket, stroked the handle of the gun, and his eyes were cold. After about a minute, the knocking on the door continued, but it was no longer as strong and rhythmic as before. It seemed that there was more than one person here. There were at least 2 of them. The one who knocked on the door just now had taken the opportunity to sneak in from another entrance. Another person knocked on the door. Judging from the strength of the knock, it should be a woman standing outside the door at this moment. From the sound and position of the knocking on the door, this woman was much taller than ordinary women. It could be seen that she had been practicing martial arts for many years and was not a simple character. At this time, Li Nanheng suddenly looked in the direction of the bedroom. There were 2 entrances to his room from the outside. One was the fire escape on the 14th floor below the bedroom, but the person was just outside the door, so it was impossible for him to go out so quickly. The other place was the balcony directly opposite the living room. They could walk along the wall of the corridor and step on the fixed air conditioner outside the wall to directly come over. It was only a short distance of more than 10 meters. For skilled people, it was very easy to go around to his outdoor balcony, and they could do it in 2 or 3 minutes. If there were 2 or more people coming, then he couldn't waste any more time. He had to deal with the woman outside before the people outside rushed in and surrounded him. Otherwise, he would be attacked from the front and back. In such a narrow room, no matter how fast he was, it was easy for him to be at a disadvantage. When the knocking on the door gradually weakened, Li Nanheng suddenly opened the door. At the moment the muzzle of the gun outside the door was pointed at his forehead, Li Nanheng instantly raised his hands and made a gesture of surrender and begging for mercy. At the same time, there was a trace of surprise in his eyes, as if he didn't expect that there would be danger outside the door. He looked at the black-haired, yellow-skinned woman who looked completely Asian outside the door. The muzzle in the Asian woman's hand had been pointed straight at the center of his eyebrows. Before the door was about to close automatically, she suddenly raised her foot and stepped on the door. Holding the gun in one hand, she quickly and neatly grabbed Li Nanheng's clothes with the other hand and pressed the muzzle against his forehead. There was a cold and triumphant smile in her eyes. "Hi, we meet again, Mr. Li." Li Nanheng's eyes changed from the initial surprise to understanding and calmness, as if he had been caught by the enemy. He said in a low voice, "Lisa, long time no see." The woman called Raisha sneered and pressed the muzzle against his forehead. At the same time, she pushed him back into the room step by step, but the muzzle was still pressed against his forehead. As she walked, she said with cold and charming eyes, "Mr. Li, do you still remember my name? Do you know what I'm here for this time?" Li Nanheng raised his eyebrows and smiled faintly. "Come to take my life?" Ruisha pinched the clothes on his chest, and the charm in her eyes suddenly turned into fierceness and hatred. She strode forward step by step, pressed the man who was forced to retreat against the wall near the balcony, and pressed him hard against the gun, saying coldly and angrily, "My husband was shot by you in the Philippines. My 7-year-old son and 2-year-old daughter fled with me to a war-torn country, only to die under the bombers of a war-torn country. My life was ruined by you. In the past 2 years, I followed that group of drug dealers to the edge of various countries just to make a living, but they still refused to let me go and sent your 11 base to kill me. My everything was ruined by you. Tell me, do you want me to take your life? 11 base has investigated your information. You were once a citizen of High City, China. At the age of 15, you frequented various nightclubs because of your youth and beauty. At the age of 17, you were abducted by your husband. After that, you fell into the underworld and wandered around the dark areas of various countries. You could have lived a peaceful life in High City, but you chose to take an unconventional path. This is the life you chose. Who can you blame? Please remember the domain name of this book. For mobile version website, You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.